Good morning. I'll call this hearing to order. I would mention that we had some regular chairs taken out, so there would be room for wheelchairs. Both Senator Sanders and I serve on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and we know that the disability community is very important and needs to be accommodated, and we'll try and do that at all the hearings, not just this one. The intention of this hearing is to have an open, bipartisan discussion on the problems caused once the Disability Insurance Trust Fund becomes exhausted. We also want to talk about ideas for how Congress and the President might work together to address these problems. I would mention that I try to get as much information in a hearing as possible, and you'll note that in the second panel that my witnesses, one was a part of the Obama administration, and the other is an international expert on disability and comes to us with a lot of experience. I have to say that I was dismayed to learn from press reports and inquiries from off-the-hill sources, and most importantly, senior citizens who rely on Social Security, that the Democrats on this committee released a paper accusing us of wanting to privatize Social Security. That paper and that accusation was not shared with me by other staff or by Senator Sanders. Disappointed in that. We share offices that are just across the road from each other, and hope that we can have a little more conversation on some of those things. But I want to be clear. No one on this committee is suggesting that we privatize Social Security. No one on this committee would support cutting benefits by 19%, which is exactly what's going to happen if we don't fix the Social Security Disability Insurance Trust Fund. No one supports Social Security going bankrupt. The federal government's primary program to assist the disabled will soon be broke, and regrettably, President Obama isn't doing anything to ensure that this never ever happens again. His effort to paper over the problem is a classic example of Washington ducking a real American need. In this case, disabled Americans and workers deserve a long-term solution so that the program doesn't once again flirt with disaster and, more importantly, reflect the full ability of the disabled to contribute their talents to our country. As budget chairman, I have the ability to look closely at the operations, the functions, the programs of the federal budget. How are they working? What's their impact on our budget bottom line? Are there ways to fix what doesn't work or improve the program and help our budget? One of the most amazing programs we have, which touches so many Americans in very critical ways and impresses the world, is what we do to support the disabled. America is a large-hearted country, and in reflection of our caring for some of the neediest among us, for almost 60 years, the federal government has operated a disability insurance program. The program's concept is simple. Employed Americans pay a small tax. In the event that they ever become disabled, the program provides them support if they can no longer work and earn a living. This year, the disability program will benefit up to 11 million Americans. These beneficiaries are our constituents. They had jobs, they paid a tax into the system, then in some way, at some point, they became disabled. They could no longer work or earn a living or support a family. This is where the disability program stepped in. It lent an able hand of support so that potential income that was lost was in some way offset. But now this program's under threat, a threat that it will run out of money. And that isn't a surprise to anyone except maybe the President. The officers of the government directly responsible for the program have been telling the government for years that it'll run out of money. In fact, I think they started suggesting it in 1994, and they even predicted that it would be 2016 that it would run out of money. So this shouldn't be any big surprise. Outside analysts of the program have been telling the government for years that it will run out of money. The disabled community has been telling the government for years that it will run out of money. Maybe I ought to say that one more time. It's been predicted. Suddenly the President woke up to the fact this year. Perhaps it's because now we know for sure not just that we will run out of money, but based on our own Treasury Department's figures this month, when it will be broke. Let me put this as clearly as possible. No waffle words, no Washington word games. By December of next year, or early January, the program will be broke if we don't fix it. And once broke, the law governing the program means that benefits for disabled must be cut or delayed. That's just rotten. But that's not all the bad news. Once that fund becomes insolvent, our congressional budget experts tell us the program will need $352 billion over the next 10 years in order to fully pay disability claims. I have a chart up over there that shows the fund with money coming down to a crossover point where it doesn't, and that crossover point, of course, is next December. That's less than a year from that crossover. For Wyoming alone, this means 13,900 disabled people would lose $3 million in benefits. In Vermont, this means that 24,500 disabled people would have their benefits reduced by $5 million. And Senator Sanders, we represent two of the smaller states. Looking around the committee room, millions of additional Americans from all our states could see their benefit cut. In the face of this crisis facing 11 million Americans, what does the President propose to guarantee a robust and enduring program for them in succeeding generations? He proposes a plan that seems to be something, but actually turns out to be nothing. Instead of thinking about how best the disabled by creating a long-term solution, the best values for them and the program, the President has suggested that all we need to do is shift payroll tax revenue coming in from other programs to cover the shortfall in the disability program. All this does is pass the buck to another Congress and another president after Barack Obama leaves office. We had a president years ago that said the buck stops here, and we need to stop the buck. President Obama's transfer plan runs up the debt we owe to pay the retirement benefits Social Security recipients rely on. We call it a trust fund. Don't trust a federal trust fund. There are not dollars stashed away anywhere. There are no dollars in the Disability Trust Fund, and there are no dollars in the Social Security Trust Fund. We actually more accurately ought to call it accounts payable, because it is further debt. We spent the money. Most importantly, it leaves all working Americans and the disabled without certainty about the program and unable to fully live out their ability to live the American dream. Why do I say that? Well, the ability to tap human potential has changed dramatically since the program was first created in 1956. According to a recent article in The Economist, the disability insurance program's whole design is antiquated. It presumes that people once disabled cannot work. If they do, they usually lose their benefits. Yet lots of people with disabilities can work. Wheelchairs didn't stop FDR from becoming president or Greg Abbott from becoming the governor of Texas. On behalf of those who use it, we need to modernize the disability insurance program. In the 1950s, when workers were doing manual labor and they experienced a debilitating condition, many times that was it. They could not work anymore. But the work our constituents do has changed as our service and knowledge economy has grown significantly during the past 6 decades. Thanks to technology, people are also more likely to work from home, to have flexible hours, and even start their own businesses. All of these changes have made it easier for those with disabilities to continue working. And studies have shown that those with disabilities tend to be happier, healthier, and have higher incomes when they're working. I have another chart up here, and it shows 1982, how many people had their own labor income, and as opposed to now, and who have just the SSI and SSDI income. So it dropped from 23% down to 12%, and the reliance increased from 14 to 25%. Unfortunately, as the chart on the screen shows, the disabled today are less likely to earn income from working than ever before. This is true even after Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, mandating changes in the workplace intended to facilitate employment for the disabled. Buried deep in the President's budget are a few programs that might be a grudging acknowledgement there is much more to be done to create a disability system that can support the ability of disabled Americans to still contribute to our workforce. I'm encouraged by some of the demonstration ideas proposed in the President's budget to keep those with disabilities in the workforce. However, we need to do more without putting an additional burden on our finances. We should be working in partnership along with Republicans, Democrats, House and Senate, and the President to provide long-term security our disabled deserve, and the program finances that fit our balance sheet. Together, we can do better. To protect the most vulnerable among us, we should all agree that political gamesmanship must not get in the way of our commitment to help our constituents who need us the most. Senator Sanders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before I get into my remarks, let me respond briefly to something that you just said about some of us, and I will take that responsibility of suggesting that some of my Republican colleagues are looking forward to either cutting Social Security or moving to the privatization of Social Security. That is exactly what I said. And let me quote to you from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, major newspaper in Georgia, from Tom Price, who, as you know, is the chairman, not just any Republican, he happens to be chairman of the House Budget Committee, from a January 15th, 2015 article. And I'll just excerpt some of it. But he says, on the issue of Social Security, it has indeed been the third rail, as Tim Chapman mentioned, and what I'm hopeful is what the Budget Committee will be able to do is begin to normalize the discussion and debate about Social Security. And then he goes on to say, so all the kinds of things you know about, whether it's means testing, whether it's increasing the age of eligibility, the kind of choices, whether it's providing much greater choices for individuals to voluntarily select the kind of manner in which they believe they ought to be able to invest their working dollars as they go through their lifetime, all those things ought to be on the table and discussed. So what he is talking about is looking at cutting benefits or moving toward the privatization of Social Security. And Mr. Chairman, the Social Security Disability Insurance Program is a life and death program for nearly 11 million Americans, including more than 1 million veterans and 1.8 million children. This is a program that American workers have paid into. It is an insurance program. This is not charity. When Americans pay 6.2% of their income in the payroll tax, almost 1% of that amount goes into the disability insurance program. The average disability insurance benefit is less than $1,200 a month. And for 30% of the beneficiaries, this is their entire income. Nobody is getting rich off of disability benefits. Sadly, on the very first day of the new Congress, House Republicans passed a rule that would lay the groundwork for a 19% cut in Social Security disability insurance benefits. This means, if that cut were to go through, that the average benefit of approximately $13,980 a year for a disabled person would be cut by $2,600 to $11,324. Does anybody on this committee really believe that a person with a severe disability, maybe they're facing a terminal illness, maybe they're paralyzed, maybe they've had their legs amputated, does anybody in this room really believe that a disabled person in America should be forced to live on $11,324 a year? Mr. Chairman, in my view, the debate we are having today is nothing more than a manufactured crisis, which is part of the long-term Republican agenda of trying to cut Social Security. And in my view, this is a terrible and dangerous idea. Today, Social Security has a $2.8 trillion surplus and can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 18 years. That is not the opinion of Bernie Sanders. That report comes from the Social Security trustees. Now, because of an aging population, because of more women in the workforce, because of an increase in the retirement age, there has been an increase in the number of Americans who are receiving disability benefits. Mr. Chairman, this is not a surprise. This is a demographic reality that the Social Security Administration predicted would happen back in 1994. The fact that the Social Security Disability Insurance Program is facing a funding shortfall next year is a surprise to absolutely no one. Furthermore, and importantly, shortfalls in the Social Security Disability Insurance Program or the Social Security Retirement Program is nothing new. It has happened 11 times in the past and has always been resolved in a simple, non-controversial way, and that is in a nonpartisan way, and that is by the reallocation of funds between the Social Security Retirement Fund and the Social Security Disability Fund. As this chart shows, reallocation was done in 1968 under President Johnson, 1970 under President Nixon, 1978, 79, 80 under President Carter, 1982, 83, 84 under President Reagan, 94, 97, 2000 under President Clinton. Interestingly, this is interesting, of the 11 times that funds were reallocated from one fund to the other, it turns out that on 5 occasions, it was the disability fund that was reallocated to help the retirement fund. Mr. Chairman, every major senior citizen organization in this country, including the AARP, and I believe their letter is on the desks of everybody in this room, including the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, the Alliance for Retired Americans, and many other organizations, representing over 60 million older Americans, all support reallocation and are united in opposition to the rule passed by the House Republicans to make reallocation more difficult. Here is what, very briefly, the AARP letter says, and it's up there on the chart. To prevent any imminent reductions in SSDI benefits, we urge you to rebalance the allocation of Social Security payroll taxes between the OASI Trust and the DI Trust, as Congress has done with success in the past. Because of the SSDI, millions of disabled Americans are able to live their lives with dignity and support their families. The highest priority in the near term is to ensure that SSDI beneficiaries, most of whom are older Americans, are not put at risk of a 20% benefit cut in the very near future. End of quote from AARP. I am delighted that President Obama proposed this reallocation plan in his budget request. Mr. Chairman, the Social Security Trust Fund can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 18 years. There is no imminent crisis. But I do agree with many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and with many economists that it is terribly important that we do better than 18 years to make sure that Social Security is there for our kids and for our grandchildren. In my view, the best way to extend the solvency of the Social Security Trust Fund over the long term is to eliminate the cap that currently exists on taxable income that goes into the Social Security Trust Fund. Right now, in the midst of a massive wealth and income, in the midst of massive wealth and income inequality, which we see in our country, a Wall Street CEO who makes $20 million a year pays the same amount into Social Security as someone who makes $118,500. That is wrong. In 2013, I asked the chief actuary of the Social Security Administration to estimate how long the solvency of Social Security would be extended based on legislation that I offered, which would apply the Social Security payroll tax on income above $250,000, lift the cap on all income above $250,000. His answer was that the Social Security Trust Fund would be made solvent, Mr. Chairman, until 2060, 45 years from today. And, Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to insert that letter into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, we all know that the huge increase in wealth and income inequality in America has seen millions of Americans lose a substantial part of their income. The middle class is shrinking. In fact, while the wealthiest people have become much wealthier, real median family income today is almost $5,000 less than it was in 1999. Now, this is a tragedy unto itself, but it has also had a major impact on Social Security. If income inequality, and this is really an amazing fact, if income inequality remained at the same level today as it was in 1983, Social Security would have $1.1 trillion more than it does today, because workers with higher income would have contributed more into the system. If the payroll tax had simply continued to cover 90% of all earnings, which it did in 1983, rather than the 83% that it covers today, the Social Security Trust Fund would be able to pay every benefit owed to every eligible American, not just for the next 18 years, but for the next 38 years. So, bottom line is, short term, we have to do what has been done 11 times in the past. Long term, we have to work together to make Social Security solvent for our kids and our grandchildren. In the midst of massive wealth and income inequality in this country, we have got to lift the cap on taxable income. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I just want to have everybody aware that I am keeping track of what the House does as well. Not that we have to do what the House does, but I need to know what they're doing. And I have been following their rules, and their rules do not prohibit a reallocation, nor does it call for benefit cuts. It does include a point of order against reallocation only if the move isn't accompanied by policies to improve solvency of the combined Social Security Trust Fund. And there are a number of ways to do that. I mentioned that the President has some in his budget. So it will allow reallocation as long as it includes savings for the OASDI program, however small. Otherwise, at the next time that we reach this crisis, we'll have about 3 of these funds coming due at the same time, and we won't be able to shift the money. So I hope everybody understands that, and I want to thank you for your comments. For our first panel, our witness is Carolyn Colvin, and she has served as the Acting Commissioner of Social Security since February 14th, 2013. Prior to this designation, she served in a number of roles at the Social Security Administration under the Clinton administration, including Deputy Commissioner for Policy and External Affairs, Deputy Commissioner for Programs and Policy, and Deputy Commissioner for Operations. Ms. Colvin has also served in a number of other public positions in the District of Columbia and Maryland, including as Director of Human Services for the District of Columbia. Ms. Colvin has graduate and undergraduate degrees in Business Administration from Morgan State University. For the information of colleagues, Acting Commissioner Colvin will take about 5 minutes for her opening statement, followed by questions. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Enzi, Ranking Member Sanders, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss status of the Social Security Disability Insurance Trust Fund, our efforts to help people with disabilities re-enter or stay in the workforce, our continuing disability review process, and the steps we have taken to ensure the integrity of our disability decisions. My name is Carolyn Colvin, and I'm Social Security's Acting Commissioner. I've served in this position since February 2013. The Social Security DI program provides important financial protection for workers who paid into the system and now need help because they have disabilities. Almost 9 million people with disabilities and 2 million of their spouses and children are currently receiving benefits from the DI program. Realize that these are very modest benefits, $1,165 average per month for a worker. Because the program is vital to workers and their families, we must take steps to ensure its stability and avoid deep and abrupt cuts or cessation of benefits for individuals with disabilities. To this end, the President's FY 2016 budget proposes to address the near-term DI reserve depletion by reallocating a part, 0.9 percentage points of payroll taxes from OASI to the DI Trust Fund for just 5 years, 2016 through 2020. The temporary reallocation the President proposes will have no effect on the overall health of the combined OASI and DI trust funds. which will remain adequately financed until 2033 on a combined basis, nor will it result in a change for workers and employers who will continue to pay the same amount of FICA taxes they do now. The proposal to reallocate existing payroll tax collections between the OASI and DI trust funds is consistent with past congressional action where Congress approved legislation as needed for reallocation from DI to OASI or vice versa. These are earned benefits. These two funds provide social insurance for Americans at all stages of life. The same worker who becomes disabled today will become a retiree in the future. To strengthen the DI program and ensure its integrity, we ask your support for several initiatives. The Social Security Act includes incentives to encourage disability beneficiaries to return to work by allowing continuation of benefits and medical coverage while working or pursuing an employment goal. Although these have produced modest success, we want to explore new ideas. It is essential that we, including Congress, can make evidence-based decisions on innovations to improve the ability of individuals with disabilities to succeed in the workforce. Conducting demonstration projects is the best way to gather the evidence needed to evaluate policy options. While our previous demonstrations have shown that interventions after individuals qualify for DI benefits can yield positive outcomes, earlier interventions may prove more effective. Thus, the President's FY 2016 budget provides continued support for a multi-year initiative to test strategies to help people with disabilities remain and succeed in the workforce. We appreciate Congress's $35 million appropriation in FY 2015 to begin this effort. The budget requests $50 million in FY 2016 and a legislative proposal requesting $350 million over the following 3 fiscal years. We take very seriously our stewardship of the DI trust funds and taxpayers' money. We strive to make the right payment to the right person at the right time. We use cost-effective continuing disability reviews to determine whether an individual continues to be medically qualified. To select cases for these reviews, we use predictive models to target cases where medical improvement is most likely. The President's FY 2016 budget proposes a dedicated program integrity fund to support 908,000 full medical CDRs, a 15% increase over FY 2015. We can estimate that CDRs conducted in 2016 will yield a return on investment of about $9 on average in net federal savings over 10 years per $1 budgeted. We use a strict single national definition of disability. When evaluating disability claims, every decision maker must use the criteria in the Act and our regulations. We have multiple levels of quality review to ensure that the rules are applied uniformly and correctly. As required by law, we review at least a half of initial and reconsideration disability allowances before payment is made. These pre-effectuation reviews allow us to correct any errors before we issue a final decision on eligibility. We also extensively train and use tools to enable our adjudicators to follow our policies accurately and consistently, such as a web-based claims analysis tool that helps to ensure policy compliance by requiring examiners to follow all of our steps in our disability claims evaluation process, as well as comparative tools and data analytics. In conclusion, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the vitally important DI program and our continuous efforts to improve its administration. I will be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your statement, and thank you for meeting separately, of course, with myself and Senator Sanders yesterday. Some of these questions we will have already covered. I was impressed with your answers yesterday. To start out with the questions, and we'll have around 5-minute questions. The President's budget has proposed reallocating the payroll tax to delay the DI Trust Fund insolvency. If there were no other changes, does reallocation of the payroll tax worsen the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund for Social Security retirement?
I'm sorry, say the last part, please.
Does the reallocation worsen the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund for the Social Security retirement?
I think it's very hard to separate the two funds. This is one program. The worker, as you know, pays 6.2%, and a portion goes to the DI trust fund and a portion to OSI. So I think we really have to think about that in terms of one program, because the person, if they become disabled, would benefit, and then, of course, when they retire, they benefit. And in fact, many simply transfer from the DI program to the OASI program, from the DI program, to the OASI program. So I think that it is imperative that we see the reallocation, which would give us adequate time to look at long-term solutions that we need to take.
How much are we reallocating?
We're reallocating simply 0.9% from the OASI fund to the DI fund, and that will still allow the program to be solvent through 2033.
Mm-hmm. Instead of a percent, can you give me dollars that are being reallocated?
I would need to calculate that. I don't have the exact amount of dollars. I'll give it to you in a minute.
Okay. The President's budget proposes several program and integrity initiatives that could produce savings. Do you know how much these initiatives would save the disability insurance fund before it's exhausted? And can you mention any of those suggested programs?
There are a number of proposals in the President's budget. The one that I want to mention first is the funding for the continuing disability reviews. As you know, we should be doing reviews every 3 years. When people come on the rolls, we know that some are likely to improve, and we need to be able to do those reviews to determine if they have, in fact, improved and are no longer disability. We have been able to determine that for every $1 that we spend, we bring back $9 into the program. So I think that's a very effective program. We also are looking at a number of programs or initiatives that we believe would slow down the number of people coming onto the rolls. That would be our early intervention programs, where we would be able to test whether or not supportive employment and other types of services would allow people to stay in the job market longer. And of course, we know that only about 1% of our population go off the rolls now because the definition is so strict, and we're serving the most severely disabled.
So you'll have some suggestions for how to do that then, I assume?
We would certainly look forward to working with Congress to come up with solutions that would be bipartisan. I think that there have been many proposals proposed. I think you do have to be cognizant of the impact on the various demographic populations. I think one of the things that the President has clearly stated is that any proposal really has to strengthen the program. It should not reduce benefits. People should be able to expect a robust disability benefit or a retirement benefit when they need it, but we'd be very happy to work with Congress on any initiatives. Let me mention the figure that you asked for. We would be looking at $330 billion in savings over a five-year period through 2016 to 2020. So I think, does that answer your question?
Can you repeat that number for me again?
$330 billion over a five-year period from 2016 to 2020.
Thank you. And my next question would take a little. We will be submitting questions as well, the ones that have more detailed numbers than that. So
we're very happy to provide that.
Okay. I'll yield the balance of my time. Senator Sanders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you very much, Madam Madam Secretary, for being with us. In fact, you are the acting commissioner, are you not?
Yes, I've been acting for 2 years.
You've been acting for 2 years?
Yes.
Well, I would hope very much that we in the Senate will move to confirm you and remove the acting from your title. It is my understanding, Commissioner Colvin, that the average disability insurance benefit is around $1,150 a month?
That's correct, $1,165 to be exact.
If, in fact, a 19% reduction took place, that benefit would be reduced, if my arithmetic is correct, to about $11,324. In real human terms, what does this mean to a disabled American, maybe somebody with a terminal illness, somebody paralyzed, somebody an amputee? What in real life does this mean to that person?
Well, I think we really have to think about the inadequacy of the existing benefit. We're talking about 30% of the individuals on our rolls for disability who have no other income. This disability.
No other income. So
no other
they
income.
would see a 20% or 19% cut in their income.
Well, certainly 19% would take them well below the poverty level. We're talking about almost at the poverty level now. And for about 80% of the individuals who receive this benefit, about 50% would be, they would rely on this benefit. So they're already at the edge financially of struggling to put food on the table, making choices between eating and paying their rent. I've worked with this population my entire career. This is a population that would like to work. Remember, we're talking about workers who've paid into a system, who experience a disability, a severe disability, and find that they're no longer able to work.
Commissioner, let me just ask you this. Is where we are today in terms of the Disability Insurance Fund, is that a surprise to anybody? That's number one. Or was this projected many years in the past based on demographic trends? And number two, I know you're not necessarily a historian, but you do know that time and time again, in fact, 11 times in recent years under Republican and Democratic presidents, this issue was resolved quietly, non-controversial, I think a number of times under President Reagan, that it, as you indicated, this is money coming from the worker. Am I correct in saying that this issue was dealt with nonpartisanly 11 times in recent years?
That's correct. It has been the mechanism to readjust the monies among the trust fund because, in fact, as I said, it's the same worker, simply that a portion of their taxes go into the disability trust fund and a portion into the retirement, but it's the same worker. And so it has been adjusted both ways, from DI to retirement and from retirement to DI. The last time in 1994.
Right. And without any, as I understand it, with virtually no controversy. Is that correct?
That is my understanding. And again, this does not damage the health of the combined trust funds. The trust funds will still be solvent until 2033.
And by the way, while we're on that subject, am I correct that the Social Security trustees have said that Social Security can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American until 2033?
That's correct.
Is that correct? All right, let me ask you this. I have proposed, and some of my colleagues have approached the problem in a slightly different way, but I asked the chief actuary of the Social Security Administration, Mr. Goss, to estimate how long the solvency of Social Security would be extended based on legislation that I offered, which would apply the Social Security payroll tax on income above $250,000. Will you confirm with me, and I think he is here, that his answer was that Social Security would be made solvent until 2060, 45 years from today. Is that correct?
That's correct. He is here, but I did see the letter, and that is the correct statement.
Thank you very much for the hard work that you are doing on behalf of the elderly and the disabled. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield the floor.
Thank you. Senator Corker.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to go on the record as saying that I don't think any of us here, at least be my observation, would want to trade places with someone who happens to be on Social Security disability. I think all of us want to make sure that people in need have access. I think it's also, I think everyone here knows of the tremendous hardship that people who are living on the minimum benefits, if that's their only income, is very difficult. And to the ranking member's comments, the 1983 reforms that were put in place were based on 90% of income being taxed. Today it is at 83%. That is a fact. And one of the things that Bowles Simpson, people working in a bipartisan way, had put together was raising it to 90%. But in addition to that, over time gradually increasing the age because people are living longer, using change CPI. and also adjusting the benefits so that the lower income benefit more fully from growth and upper income less. And so I would just say that it seems to me there is a way, appropriate way to deal with this issue and stand ready to work with others to make that happen so that this benefit that's so important to people will be there. As a matter of fact, I'll just it is your understanding, ma'am, and thank you for your service in this acting position. By the way, have you been put up to be the permanent person?
My name was submitted in the last session and will be resubmitted this session.
Good. Well, I look forward to that.
Thank you.
It is your understanding that the longer we wait, even though the program's solvent for 18 years, the longer we wait, it is more difficult to solve the problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. We do need to act promptly. This is a very complex problem. I think that changes have to be based on scientific evidence, and we certainly have a number of research studies that can be made available to you. And so I think that through the reallocation, which gives us a temporary reprieve, that then gives Congress to find a bipartisan solution to this long-term issue.
And I realize because of the way these budgets operate these days, this would sort of normally be the case, but it is your understanding that the President's proposal doesn't lengthen the solvency of the program. Is that correct?
That's correct. It simply buys some time for Congress to come up with a bipartisan solution.
And I would hope we would do that. It's also your understanding, is it not, that the way the President made this proposal regarding disability, it actually shortens the solvency of the program, the other portion of the program for old age retirement benefits. Is that correct?
We looked at 2034. We're talking about 1 year less for the OASDI, yes.
Yeah, but
you still have 18 years.
That's not very long, is it?
Well, I would hope it wouldn't take us 18 years to come to a bipartisan solution.
But every year we wait, it gets more difficult. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So, in many ways, if you think about it, by not addressing this issue for all of those citizens who work hard all of their lives, what this recommendation actually does is lessen those people that are never going to collect disability payments. By the grace of God, anyway, will never be in a position to have to receive those. In many ways, the ones that are working and will only receive the retirement benefits are harmed by this proposal. Is that correct?
I don't believe that. No, I don't think that's correct. I think that certainly, as we said, we need to take some action now, and I would expect that action would be taken well before 2033. So, in fact, you would be able to come up with proposals that would strengthen this program and take away the need to be concerned about what happens in 2033.
But Congress needs to do that pretty quickly.
Congress needs to do that.
And it needs to happen fairly quickly, to do it in a way that's not hugely reshaping. Would you agree?
I agree. The President has set forth 6 principles that, if you let me share with you, I think it's important.
If you don't mind, I'll read those. Thank you.
All right.
I know it's in the budget.
Okay.
Let me ask you this question. What's happened recently is when we've had economic downturns, we've had a significant increase in the use of disability payments, which speaks to something else happening in the program. In other words, all of us want people who deserve disability to get it. But when people get it that don't deserve it, it actually hurts those very people that are in need. So we've seen a change. The economic downturn causes a lot more people somehow to be on the disability program. We've also seen an appeals process which almost makes it look like there are some attorneys that almost are creating mills, if you will, to cause people to be on the program, again, not deserving people in some cases. And my time is up, I know, but do you agree that one of the things we need to also do to make sure those deserving get the benefits they need is to look at some reforms to make sure that those who may be taking advantage of it no longer do that?
We are always attentive to ensure that the decisions that are made are the right decisions. The definition of disability is that you have to have a severe impairment that prevents you from being able to do any job in the economy, and that the disability is going to last at least 12 months and may eventually result in death. I think that there is really a misconception about large numbers of people being on our rolls who are not, in fact, disabled. The average person is on the rolls for about 10 years. If you come on the rolls around 55, and a large number of our people come on the rolls around 50, they die within the first 5 years. So it again points to the fact that you have severe disability. But we focus on quality in the program. We try to make certain that our adjudicators are following the act and following the rules. We have a stringent review process. We're required to do 50% reviews of all of the cases at the DDS level before they even go to the point where they're being paid. And we have a 98% accuracy rate.
My time is up. It sounds like you don't think any reforms are due.
I definitely think we need reform. I'm not going to suggest that. We do need reform.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and Commissioner Colvin. Thank you very much for your service. Let me just start where my friend left off. I mean, I think there's a general sense that recession and more people apply for disability, and therefore more people are receiving disability. And there's the numbers that I've seen don't show that out. I mean, would you agree that more people may apply, but that doesn't mean they receive it? In fact, we have a number of cases of folks seriously disabled in Michigan that we work with all the time that have challenges even getting through the complexity of the system. And I noticed from the Office of Inspector General that of thousands of cases looked at for fraud in 2013, there were only 100 legal cases that were brought that had enough merit to bring them, and that was the lowest rate I've seen of any government program, about 10 out of a million people. So, but isn't it true, you may have more people applying, but doesn't mean you're saying yes. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator. We have many workers who are marginal. They have disabilities, and they continue to try to work. And when jobs are there, they work, even though they could certainly meet our definition. They're in and out of the job market. They're often not able to do substantial gainful activity, which is a requirement of the disability law. So some of those individuals may go on the rolls, but it's a small number. And if you look at our most recent numbers, you'll see that the initial applications are going down.
Thank you. And it's also true, I mean, when we look at the fact that we have more veterans coming home, veterans who are permanently and totally disabled as a result of military service or just as part of the community. They may, in fact, be part of those that you are serving. Is that correct?
That is correct. And the increase in the disability rolls was predicted by our actuaries. We knew that during this period we would see an increase, but it was not due to people who shouldn't get on the rolls. It was due to the demographics that Senator Sanders talked about earlier.
Sure, and we have more women coming into the workforce. And
more women.
I know, and unfortunately I'm going to be going to Finance Committee in a moment and not be able to stay for the second panel, but I do notice that we have someone in the second panel, I'm sure distinguished individual, but talking about more mental health cases that are being included as somehow a bad thing. I have to say that as somebody who's a mental health advocate, I'm glad since the 80s we recognize that there are diseases above the neck as well as below the neck, and Senator Roy Blunt and I have been leading the effort to make sure that we are more equalizing and understanding serious mental health issues. And so as that is included, I would actually commend you for that as well. Mr. Chairman, let me just say that, first of all, Social Security is something that's an insurance program that everyone pays into, and it's probably the best deal in town.
Yes, it is.
It's a retirement plan, it's a disability plan, it's survivor benefits. We're talking about in the short run the need to adjust it by less than 1%. In my judgment, the short term is a phony crisis. We have long-term challenges, so we want to make sure to keep it strong and strengthen Social Security. And I think that there is, may not be in this committee, I don't know yet, Mr. Chairman, but there certainly is a debate with many on the Republican side of the aisle about wanting to privatize or fundamentally change the structure, turn it over to Wall Street to manage, which, boy, that would have been great back a few years ago. And, you know, I guess I would say, you know, I'm a supporter of the structure of Social Security, and I think that there's a lot of things happening to working people today. They're seeing defined pension plans go away. We don't need to see Social Security go away for people in terms of fundamental kinds of financial security for people. So I also want to just recognize for the record that tomorrow is the day when millionaires in America will stop contributing to Social Security. So everybody else, if you earn $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 a year, working hard every day, you're still paying in all year. But there's a certain group of folks that they still can get Social Security, but they don't pay in anymore. So I think Senator Corker had a good idea when he talked about how we need to adjust who's certainly paying into that as well. So the final thing, I would just say that I agree with the idea that we should be focusing on opportunity and job training and creating opportunity for people to work. I think it'll be a good test of us in the Budget Committee on how those numbers look in terms of job training funding coming out of the committee. Certainly appreciate that. But in my judgment, Social Security is a great American success story, and I just want to see it strengthened. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Perdue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Administrator Colvin, thank you for your tireless service to our country. You know, this debate, this conversation is what drives people in my state absolutely crazy. I'm not from the political world, so I'm going to be very straight with you this morning. You know, the idea that this is a trumped-up phony crisis is absolutely ridiculous, and it's ridiculous to people back home. I agree with you on several things. You said this morning that we need to move to ensure that nobody loses their disability benefits. I agree 100%. But the irresponsibility since 1974 has created this situation in 2017. And what we're about to do is going to create another crisis in 2033. I have no problem. Let me make sure I understand the real simple details of this. First, the Social Security retirement fund will go from 2034 being insolvent to 2033 if we move and reallocate funds to the disability fund. So the disability fund then goes from 17 to 33. Frankly, I don't see that as a big deal. What I see as a big deal, and this is where this is not a phony crisis, Mr. Chairman, we have over $120 trillion of future unfunded liabilities coming at us like a freight train. In '94, we kicked the can down the road to 2017. Well, here we are. We're about to kick the can down the road to 2033. This should not be a partisan issue. I don't think it is a partisan issue. We get caught up in debating the wrong problem. And the wrong problem right now is what do we do to save this for 2017? That's easy. In my opinion, I don't have a problem with that. If the administration, along with all the other budget recommendations they made, came to us with a thought-out, well-thought-out, long-term strategy and recommendation to how to solve both of these trust funds for the future of our kids. I have two kids, two sons in their middle of career. I've got to look at them if we do this and say, you know what, I'm kicking the can down the road. Good luck, pals. In 2033, both of these are insolvent. I think that's correct as well. Is that right? In 2033, both the trust funds are insolvent as of 2033.
Yes, that's correct.
So what do we do?
I should say not insolvent. The reserves will be depleted. When you say insolvent, people think that means that you can't pay anything. It means you would not be able to pay the full amount. For instance, in the DI program, you would still be able to pay 80%.
Right, and as you've said before, that's a mean amount. That's a very small amount. So that's not what any of us want to do.
Absolutely.
So I think the first goal here, in my opinion, is to make sure that we can live up to the obligations that we have right now. I think everybody in the room so far has said that, and I think you've said that too, correct?
Well, I certainly believe we have to stand up to our obligations, but I do believe this problem can be fixed, and the administration has clearly indicated its desire to work with Congress to come up with a long-term solution.
And where's that recommendation? That's what I'm being asked by the people back home is, okay, the number one crisis we have right now in my mind is our ability to fund our future unfunded liabilities. Right now we have $18 trillion of debt. We have over $100 trillion of future unfunded liabilities coming at us, which is more than $1 million a household. And one of the things creating a problem in both these trust funds is the fact that today we have about 30% of our workforce not participating in the workforce. Most of those want to participate in the workforce. Between unemployment, underemployment, and people who have dropped out of the workforce, that's a large number. And if those people, a large number of those people were working, it would not create a solution for this, but it would certainly ameliorate the problem and give us more time to work on it. You said that we do not need to kick the can down the road. I think your words were, this is a temporary reprieve to give us an opportunity until 2033 to solve the problem. I think you said that, and I agree with that. The question I have is, the longer we wait, the harder it is to solve this. How can we move right now? You're the person in charge. How can we move right now to address the long-term solution and enter into an honest and open debate about solving it once and for all?
Well, Mr. Perdue, I think we have to address the more immediate crisis, which is the 2016 issue right now. And I think the President's proposal on reallocation will do that. And I think we need to do that and do that now. That does not mean that we cannot then begin to sit down and talk about the more long-term issues. But we should not have persons with disabilities wondering whether or not in 2016 they're going to still receive a full benefit.
I agree with
that.
I
think we need to do that now. We need to address the proposal that's on the table, which will also help to address some of the concerns you have about the program, that we can make sure that there's no one on the roll who shouldn't be on the roll.
And my question is, how can you ask me to do that? I agree with everything you just said. How can you ask me to do that without a bona fide, honest, straight-up proposal to solve this thing past 2033?
Well, there are various proposals out there. It's going to take a lot of discussion to come to a bipartisan.
What's the President's proposal? What's the administration's proposal to solve this past 2033?
The President's proposal is to address the immediate problem, which is
which does not solve the problem past 2033. Is that correct?
The President has an immediate solution for the 2016 problem, which is what we should address.
Agreed. But let me dial in. I'm sorry to interrupt. But there is no proposal from the administration to solve this crisis past 2033. Is that correct?
Well, he certainly has set forth the principles that I wanted to mention
but there
earlier.
Is no,
gives you
there
the
is
basis
well, let me
for
just,
what a proposal should.
I understand, but I'm really trying to get at this. We've had proposals on everything else in this budget. Is there no proposal to solve the Social Security catastrophe, impending catastrophe, which happens in 2033, coming from this administration?
I don't think it is reasonable to expect that a 2016 budget is going to have a proposal to solve a problem down the road for 2033. That's going to take a lot of bipartisan discussion and agreement. And there are many proposals out there that Congress can begin to discuss and look at as long as it follows the basic principles. And I won't try to put those forth since I see that you're not interested in them, but I think the thing that I try to convey is we need to make sure that we're going to strengthen this program, that we're not going to slash benefits, that people are going to be able to rely on a robust disability and retirement benefit.
I can assure you that I care very much about each one of those, but I also care about what happens past 2033. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator's time has expired. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Commissioner. We're delighted that you are here. The predicament that Social Security is in, some say, has something to do with income inequality. That because only the first $108,000, is it? $118,000 of income is subject to the payroll tax, that as more and more people who earn big incomes get richer and richer while the middle class goes no place, which has been our recent economic story, that more and more of the salary base of the country moves up into that above $118,000 quadrant, and that as a result, there's less money being paid into Social Security. Is that true?
That is true.
And how does the aging of the population, we had a very well-known baby boom after World War II, does that play any role in this?
Absolutely. The people who were sort of at the disability-prone years and were going on the disability rolls are now reaching their retirement years, and so they're moving over into the retirement fund. If you're lucky and you're on disability, of course, and you live long enough, then you would automatically go over. It would be seamless to you, but your benefit would begin to come out of the OSI retirement fund.
Now, both Social Security and Social Security disability are funded by the payroll tax, correct?
Payroll taxes.
And there's kind of a gate that distributes the payroll tax money between Social Security disability and Social Security retirement.
That's correct, and has always been adjusted as needed between the two funds.
Over and over, correctly?
11 times.
And both ways?
Both ways.
And now, what our friends on the House have done is they basically closed that gate in order to precipitate this crisis which will have the effect of precipitating this crisis in Social Security disability, correct? If you could move the gate, the crisis goes way off into the future.
That's correct.
All right. Now, and the amount in question to make Social Security disability hole right now, if we were to do it, is about how many billion dollars?
The 330 million that I gave before. Not, billion, I'm sorry.
Billion.
330
But that's over 10 years, so
yeah.
per year.
No, over 5 years.
5 years. Okay. And our information is that if you did something about the cap on the payroll tax, so right now you've got a situation where if you're a plumber and you make $118,000, you pay the exact same amount to support our national social security system as the hedge fund billionaire who makes $20 million a year. They both pay the exact, not just the same rate, they pay the same amount because of that cap. Now, if you were to come back in and apply the payroll tax again, our information is that if you started at the $10 million and first dollar of income, so anybody making less than $10 million would pay no additional payroll tax. So, but if you're making $10 million and $1, you'd pay a little bit of payroll tax on the $1. If you made $12 million in a year, you'd pay payroll tax on the last $2 million as well as $118,000. That if we did that, that would completely cure this problem. So if we wanted to take care of this problem, we could do it in one fell swoop. And when we're talking about millionaires and billionaires, people making more than $10 million in 1 year, to ask them to contribute a little bit more of the above $10 million salary to Social Security doesn't seem like asking a lot. And so I'd ask you to take a look at those numbers and see if the numbers work. That can be a question for the record. My information is that those numbers do work and that you can fully resolve this manufactured Social Security disability crisis that the House rule has created by simply going and asking people making more than $10 million a year to pay the same fair share that $118,000 plumber does. Actually net a good deal less, because between $118,000 and $10 million, they'll be scot-free on payroll tax. So
We'll
if you could do that,
provide those
will you look at that for me?
Absolutely.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I understand that the questions about fraud were asked already, that it's basically very, very small numbers.
Well, the question wasn't asked, and I'm glad you raised it, because there is a misperception out there. We've had a study done by the Office of Inspector General, and they have identified a very minimal amount of fraud, less than 1%. But I want to go on record and say even one case is too many, and we are very aggressive in identifying any type of fraud so that we can prosecute. We also have programs that detect it in advance.
Using computer models and so forth.
Well, also we established a cooperative disability investigative unit. We have them in 35 states. Well, at least we will have them by the end of 15. I'd like to eventually see them in all states, but this is the one program that we have that allows us to detect or prevent fraud so that we don't pay benefits and then have to chase the money. And there are a number of other very active, aggressive anti-fraud initiatives we have underway, and I'd be happy to provide that information if you want it.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expired. I thank you.
Thank you. Senator Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Conceptually, do you think it should be the Congress's goal eventually, not in the 16 budget, but eventually to come up with a solvency plan for Social Security, the disability, the retirement fund for 75 years? Would that be a good thing for America?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, as we try to accomplish that goal, I just want to make sure that I understand what we can't do. Now, Senator Whitehouse is a smart guy, and I'm sure the math works out, or he wouldn't presented the analogy of taxing people, paying payroll taxes above $10 million to fix this problem that's looming today. I just don't want America to believe that we can tax our way into solvency. Do you believe that to get a 75-year solvent program, we can do it with revenue alone?
I'm not here to advocate for a specific position. I think that we'd be very happy to work with you to tell you what's possible.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
There are many proposals, and we can help you with the analysis.
Well, when you examine his proposal about closing the gap by using payroll taxes above $10 million, could you come back and answer my question, if you could? What kind of revenue would you have to generate? What would the tax rates be to make Social Security solvent for 75 years with revenue alone?
I'm sure our actuary can provide that.
Okay, I appreciate that very much.
Mr. Chairman, may I get a copy of that as well?
Absolutely.
We can make that both.
We're going to not
you.
sneak up on you at all.
And that's what our actuaries do. If you have a proposal, the actuary will cost it out for you.
Okay.
We will let you know what the impact will be for the American public.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about why we keep having to do this. In 1956, when the Disability Fund was created, how many workers were there for every retiree in the program? I think it's 16. So I was born
We'll get that for you in a minute.
Yes, ma'am. I was born in 1955, and I believe there were, for every Social Security retiree, there were 16 workers paying into the system. Check that out.
I don't have it before me, but I know my staff
Yes,
has it.
ma'am.
It's in
Check
our
that
trustee
out.
report.
Thank you. Check that out. And today, I believe there are 3 workers for every Social Security retiree.
Today, that's correct.
Okay. In 20 years, there's supposed to be 2. Does that make sense?
Probably, as we look at the birth rate in the country.
Right. We're living longer. Life expectancy is at an all-time high. That's good news. Agreed?
Yes.
We're having fewer workers born. We're having fewer workers available to the workforce because of demographic changes, and that's a problem.
That's a problem.
So the question for the committee is, how do we fix this basic problem? 80 million baby boomers are going to retire in the next 20 years or so, and the number of workers to keep this system solvent, Social Security and Medicare, is going to be down to 2. How do 2 people pay for these programs without it putting us on the road to becoming Greece? Can you solve that problem through revenue alone? I would say no. Would the proposal the President is talking about for long-term solvency include means testing?
I don't know what the President's long-term solution will include.
Well, you just told the senator from Georgia you had a proposal.
No, I did not. I said that the reallocation proposal, which is in the budget, I did not speak.
But
to
I
a
thought
long-term
you said
proposal.
you had some concepts. Or
Oh, I talked about the concepts, the principles, that any reform...
principles, I'm sorry, is my bad,
Yes.
not proposal, principles. Is one of those principles means testing?
No, it is not.
Is one of those principles age adjustment for retirement?
No.
One of those principles CPI adjustment?
Would you like me to tell you what the 6 principles are?
Yes, ma'am. You've told me what they're not, so tell me what they are.
All right. The first one is that any reform should strengthen Social Security for the future and restore long-term
That's not a
solvency.
principle. That's just a statement. Okay. Number 2.
The second, the administration will oppose any measures that privatize or weaken the Social Security
That's not a
system.
principle as much as it is what you won't do. Okay.
Third, while all measures to strengthen solvency should be on the table, the administration will not accept an approach that slashes benefits for future generations.
Well, let's so you just told me means testing is not on the table. Is that consistent with that statement?
I can only give you the statements that I
Okay.
give you, sir.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
Current beneficiaries should not see their basic benefits reduced.
Okay.
Reform
These
should
proposals. Okay, I'm
strengthen
sorry. Keep going.
Social Security for the most vulnerable, including our low-income seniors, and reform should maintain a robust disability and survivor benefit structure.
That's a set of principles that make sure we do absolutely nothing meaningful. So I just want to say, if that's the President's plan, we'll never get there. That is not my plan. I'm willing to stretch myself and my party. I'm willing to do revenue to get us to entitlement reform.
I'm very happy to talk about the President's plan that's in his budget for reallocation.
Yes, ma'am. I know you are, and that plan has been used in the past, and I don't know how we'll fix this problem, but we will. I just want to let you know that I'm really tired of bailing out water when the boat has got a hole in it a mile wide, and we're using a very small pail. And somebody, someday, somehow, up here is going to have to do the hard things. And I just want to put myself on the record, is be willing to do hard things as long as they work. And we will fix this problem, but apparently we're not going to do much more than that. Thank you very much.
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Colvin. I'm going to take my wife out for dinner Saturday for Valentine's Day. And when I'm toasting her, I'm going to toast you.
Thank you, sir.
I'm going to toast you because you were nominated to be commissioner on Valentine's Day.
I was.
2 years ago.
Yes. Thank
2
you for
years ago.
remembering that.
And you have been in acting for 2 years. A mayor-governor insight. Not having confirmed leadership always is weaker than having confirmed leadership. Always. Always. When the Senate doesn't exercise the advise and consent function to confirm a leader, we create some weaknesses within an organization despite the best efforts of actings, but we also send a message. We send a message to the public that we don't think this agency is that important. We don't think this agency that provides Social Security to the most vulnerable people in our country is that important. And I've noticed something, Mr. Chairman, as I've been here for a couple of years. This happens a lot, and it seems to happen with agencies that are kind of the same. 2 years of acting at Social Security, 6.5 years of acting, not a confirmed administrator, for CMS, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, the single largest line item in the budget of the United States that is specifically designed to serve vulnerable people. This is actually a bipartisan comment. The first 2 years where the Democratic Senate did not want to approve an administrator at the end of the Bush administration. Then for 4.5 years, the Republican senators did not want to approve President Obama's nominee. 6.5 years without enacting in the program that is the largest program, larger than the defense budget. FHFA, Federal Housing Financing Agency, 4 years of acting before Mel Watt was finally confirmed, and to do that we had to change the Senate rules. Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, 1.5 years of acting. The agencies where we allow actings and where we don't move to confirm dramatically are all in the human services side. They're all in the human services side. We don't have an acting Secretary of Defense. Now, in the Department of Defense, there's a lot of questions about contracts and cost overruns and all kinds of things. But we don't have an acting Secretary of Defense. What we have is actings in agencies that serve vulnerable people. I'm worried about this because I'm worried about an old-timey term that raises a lot of angst in Virginia, legal nullification, trying to nullify the law. If there's an agency that is controversial or unliked, and there is not enough votes to get rid of the agency, and there is not enough votes to defund the agency, what is the next thing that you can do? Not vote to confirm a leader. Not vote to confirm a leader. And I'm just fascinated by the fact that most of these long-term actings where the Senate won't act to confirm a leader cluster in programs that serve the most vulnerable Americans. So I'm going to toast you on Valentine's Day, and I'm going to toast you and hope that that acting title is removed, and that the Social Security Administration, which serves vulnerable Americans every day, will be respected enough by the Senate to actually have a confirmed leader. I want to ask you about anti-fraud efforts. One of our colleagues, not on this committee, the folks on this committee are far too savvy to say something like this, but one of our colleagues said recently, and I quote, "Over half the people on disability are either anxious or their back hurts." That was a comment made by one of our Senate colleagues in January. I find that to be a very offensive comment, but it's also quite inaccurate. And I want you to tell the committee some of the things that you're doing every day, some of the reforms you are putting in place to take the really low fraud rate, very, very low, and make it even lower.
Well, first of all, people do not get on our rolls simply because they have a back pain that they allege. That statement has to be corroborated by medical evidence, including lab reports. So I really need to say that. The people on our rolls are the most severely disabled. We have 58 million people in this country who have self-identified that they're disabled, and we only have 9 million on the rolls, 7 million who are workers, and 2 that are 9 million workers who are severely disabled. But we take fraud very seriously, and most of the fraud that's been detected in our program has been detected by our own staff. Our big challenge, of course, is the third-party fraudsters like doctors and lawyers who facilitate fraud. And in the President's proposal is a proposal, the President's budget is a proposal that would allow us to go after overpayments for those individuals, because often they're not.
In the President's budget proposal,
yes,
there are additional anti-fraud
there are additional anti-fraud initiatives
to help the solvency of this program.
Absolutely. That's one. The other is the CDRs that I talked about. If we get those fully funded, because we have people on the rolls that are entitled to receive a check until we determine that they're no longer disabled. So they're not being fraudulent, but you would say that you still have that. The CDI units that I talked about. When I was here in 1998 under President Clinton, I established a unit that was a partnership between the Office of Inspector General and law enforcement at the local level and us here at the federal level. And these identify people who are pretending that they are disabled, and we are able to then stop them from getting a payment. It's been hugely successful. OIG would say that there's probably about $17 return for every $1 that is spent. We only have 35 of those. When I came back after being away for 15 years, we only had 24. I increased 5 in 14, and I'm doing another 5 in 15. So that will take that number up. We should have one in every state, but it takes funding to do that. We also are establishing a centralized fraud unit that is being very aggressive in using data analytics. We're working with the private sector, and we're doing some benchmarking to look at what else we can do to be able to detect the fraud before it occurs.
Yeah, Commissioner Colvin, I've run over time, and I just want to thank you for that answer, and I know that there's more on this score.
We'd be happy to provide more for the record if someone wants it.
Senator Grassley.
Yeah. Commissioner Colvin, I regularly hear from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle contending Republicans are attempting to manufacture a crisis in disability insurance program where none exists. They argue it has been regularly practiced to simply transfer funds from the old age fund to the disability fund to cover any shortfall. However, that understanding appears to not square with reality. I use this example. Last year, in response to a question from Chairman Hatch at the Finance Committee hearing, Deputy Commissioner LaCanfora testified that she was unaware of any past, quote, standalone legislation that reallocated payroll tax inflows from the OASI trust fund to the DI trust fund, end of quote. So, Commissioner Colvin, could you confirm previous allocations from the old age fund to the disability fund were not done as standalone legislation? And then, in addition, is there any reason that a standalone reallocation should be the only option considered now?
I'm not certain I know what you mean when you say standalone. I don't think that the proposal that the President is making is any different than what has occurred in the past. We've had 11 reallocations in the past from the DI to the OSI and vice versa. So I'm not sure that I understand what standalone means. I'd have to go back and research that and give you something for the record.
Okay. You can supplement the record if you want to, but the most recent allocation was in 1994, included an alteration of eligibility for drug addiction and alcoholism to qualify for disability.
Okay.
I'll go to my second question now. It is generally understood that demographic changes have contributed to increased benefits and the projected shortfall, but I'm also curious as to the contribution of certain policy changes. According to the Congressional Budget Office, legislation in the early 1980s increased subjectivity in the determination of policy because it, quote, allowed symptoms of mental illness and pain to be considered in assessing whether a person qualified for admission to the DI program, even in the absence of clear-cut medical diagnosis, end of quote. CBO goes on to say that these changes, quote, led to a substantial expansion in the share of DI beneficiaries with mental and musculoskeletal disorders, end of quote. So, Commissioner Colvin, do you agree with the CBO analysis? Is the increased subjectivity in the determination of disability something Congress should be concerned about?
I don't think that that statement is fully accurate. Certainly there is an area of subjectivity, but that is complemented by the medical evaluations that I talked about earlier, that no one can come on the roll simply because they allege pain or some other medical disability that is not substantiated or corroborated by medical records and laboratory results. Now, in 1984, when Congress acted to make some changes to the law, and some would suggest that it was liberalized, you may remember that Congress acted because they felt that the interpretation of the law was very narrow and was not intended to be implemented the way it was implemented. So you had the Medical Improvement Initiative, you had mental health, and coming out of the mental health community, I certainly think it was the right thing to do. Mental health is an illness, but again, there's very specific criteria that individuals follow in making those decisions. We work with the Institute of Medicine and other such organizations to make sure that we're staying current with medical science. We follow the science. We don't create the medicine, but we interpret it based on what is happening in the medical community at the time. So I don't think that the 1984 laws liberalized the program. I think that the increase that you saw was the result of the economic and demographic factors that we've talked about. Aging of the baby boomers, reaching the disability-prone years, more women coming into the workforce, those kinds of things. And we do a lot of quality review around those subjective areas that you've talked about. We give ongoing training. As I mentioned before, 50% of all decisions at the DDS level are reviewed for accuracy before we make a payment. So I think we have control in those areas.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to Senator Perdue's questions and what troubles me about this. I'm touched by your faith in bipartisanship to solve difficult problems, but not fully confident. We're much more adept at bipartisan avoidance than we are bipartisan solutions. And 2033 isn't that far off.
That's correct.
I remember 1998. It wasn't that long ago. 2033 is going to come, and what I fear is we will have taken a series of steps, such as the one proposed here, and then we'll be faced with exactly the same problem, only much larger, on a much more broad scale, involving not only disability but the old age program, and we will have run out of places to hide. And let me just state categorically, I do not in any way, shape, or form want to see cuts in disability benefits. I do not want to see any diminution of what is already a fairly modest level of support. But what bothers me is the solution, and the solution is avoidance. And inevitably, you've used the phrase, the combined funds actuarially don't change. Well, that's true because one comes down and the other goes up. But the old age does come down by a year. Not a lot, but it's the principle of the thing. And we just keep doing this. And I would much rather see some serious discussion about, A, does the program need additional funds because more people are disabled, more people in the workforce, demographics, and are there things that we can do to improve the program and provide the appropriate benefits, but at the same time cut the costs? For example, greater back-to-work programs. I mean, one of the problems, I'm sure you're aware, is the so-called cash cliff, where there's very little incentive to go back to work. The private sector disability insurance, we have a company based in Maine called Unum that does a great deal of work with this. They've been very successful at getting people back to work. The rate, as I understand it, in this program, in disability, Social Security disability, is 1% to 4% ever go back to work.
That's correct.
It seems to me that dealing with the cash cliff problem, some kind of phasing, greater intervention, working with these folks to get them back into the workforce, which I suspect they would like to do, would do a lot for the actuarial balance of the program. Periodic reviews, demonstration programs to show how we can do this. I'd like to see that refunded. You mentioned the $1 for $9 return. We've got to do things like that, make those kind of programmatic changes, but it just bothers me that we're basically taking from one fund and giving to the other and calling that a solution and saying, well, 23, I think one of my colleagues said, is way off into the future. It's not. And actuarial numbers don't lie, and it's going to come, and this is just another way of making that problem worse when it does come. So I commend you for the proposal and for the President's stepping forward, but I think it's just too easy to say, oh, we're just going to do this for 5 years. It's going to make it okay, and somebody else will deal with it in 2033. We're dealing with problems now because our colleagues 20, 30 years ago didn't. And it's just going to get worse. Problems put off rarely get easier to solve with the passage of time. I'm sorry to lecture you, but I just had to say I understand the impulse here, but I think it's bipartisan avoidance, not bipartisan solution. Do you agree that some of these back to work and the cash cliff, that those could be effective in dealing with the long-term actuarial problems?
That's one of the reasons that the President's budget proposes a number of demonstration projects so we can see just how effective they are. But clearly we know that early intervention is the key, Mr. King, because many of the people who come on our rolls are not going to be physically able to go back to work. We certainly want those who are able to go back to work, and about 1% do. But and I think that's terrific, considering that the average amount of time on our rolls is about 10 years. So if you get that 1% to go back to work, that's about 10%. But I think the key is early intervention to try to get people to be able to remain in the workforce before they come out.
And also the rule that you can't work at all for, 2 years before you're eligible, or
there are some work restrictions.
I mean,
and we're looking at all of those things. I don't want to suggest that within the agency we're not looking to see from the beginning of the process to the end if there are things that we want to recommend that would require legislative changes. But I just want to reemphasize that anything to fix the program will require congressional action, not administrative action, congressional action.
I understand that, but I'd like to see and I understand that we've got an immediate problem, 2016, and we've got to deal with that, and maybe this rebalancing that you're talking about is the only short-term solution, but I would only support that if I also saw, along with that, other changes in the program that would increase the actuarial soundness of the overall program and leave us where we are in 2033 instead of aggravating the problem by just pushing it out a few years. Thank you very much, and thank you for your service under very difficult circumstances. I associate myself with Senator Kane's remarks. We should get you confirmed so you can fully get to work. I'm a former governor. I think executives should be able to choose the people that they want to work with them, and whatever their party, and stand or fall on the quality of their people. Thank you for your service.
Senator Sessions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for, I think, a very important hearing. Commissioner Colvin, it's great to have you here, and we just have to talk about it. Senator King says actuarial numbers don't lie, and we might as well face up to the difficulties. Commissioner Colvin, isn't it fundamentally true that as you consider disability an insurance program, we don't have enough, each individual that pays in to the Social Security through their payroll taxes for disability actually, in effect, is paying in less than they are drawing out if they become disabled over time as a general numbers?
I would have to give you those numbers for the record. I'm not certain that that's fully accurate, because remember that the average amount of time that someone spends on the on our rolls is 10 years, and that for anyone coming on who's 55, they die within the first 5 years. So I would like to go back and get the data to make sure that's accurate.
Well, Well, I think if we're running out of money because it's not actuarially sound, is it? I mean, if you're an insurance company, you would have to raise income or cut benefits to keep it on a sound path.
And those are the things that I hope Congress will look at. What is
I know.
the path?
I know. It's our responsibility. It's in law. It's not your. We created this, and we have a shortfall, it seems to me. And with regard to Social Security, the retirement benefit, it's a similar thing. We've created a system that creates a benefit, increasing benefit when the economy grows, and we don't have enough money coming in, both overall and per individual. Is that correct?
Well, we recognize that you have far fewer workers paying into the system than you did when the program was created. I mean,
Right.
We celebrate our 80th anniversary this year. Social Security will have been in existence, but it is a basic financial security system for the workers of this country.
But-
and I think it behooves us to figure out how to make it financial.
I agree. We need to make it sound, and it's not your responsibility, it's ours. I acknowledge that. But as I understand it, a worker turning 65 in 2020 who made average wages over their lifetime will pay in $427,000 plus that includes the interest that would be accruing on that into Medicare and Social Security, but they would receive over $100,000 more. $536,000 in benefits. So I'm just asking you, this is an actuarially unsound proposition, is it not?
I'd have to look at your numbers. As I say, we recognize that, we do the trustee report each year, so we predict what the impact will be each year.
Well, let me just ask you this. You're in charge of this program. The average person over their lifetime, aren't they going to draw, if on average, they'll draw out more than they pay in, including the interest that might accrue?
I'm not sure of that. I'd like to get back with an answer for the record on that. I don't know if that's accurate.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'd like to know that. If that's not, then we got less of a problem than I thought we had. It'd be nice if that were so.
I really don't. I don't know that number. I need to get back to you for the record with that.
Now, with regard to the disability situation, colleagues, and I know Senator Enzi is going to be wrestling with this, but the administration has said that we would just take the money from the Social Security Retirement Fund and fix this in the interim. I understand that's a solution. I understand the House have said that they don't want to do that, and there's got to be more reforms, which I think should be. Anybody that saw the 60-minute show on disability and lawyers and judges that are too lax and the problems that we have, it's really serious. So I think we need to do that, but I do hope that we can work together on a bipartisan basis to get some reforms in this system instead of just raiding the retirement fund, because it's going kaput too. It's on an unsustainable path, and the more we take from it to fund the disability portion, the weaker it becomes. So we're not really doing anything but, robbing Peter to pay Paul. And Mr. Chairman, my time's up. Thank you. I look forward to working with you on that. And if you would give me your best estimate on the cash flow of individuals, I'd appreciate that.
Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much for your testimony today, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my understanding that a lot of veterans are on Social Security disability. Is that correct?
We have 1 million right now.
I have a couple letters that I'd share from veterans back in Oregon. Kenneth from Medford wrote, "All of my disability came from my service in Vietnam. I am totally dependent on Social Security disability check. If I don't get paid, I can't pay the rent. It is impossible for me to work because of my disability, so please stop this game." He's taking it very personally that people are attacking veterans on disability. And Roberta from Portland, she wrote, "Dear Senator Merkley, my name is Roberta, and I'm a 100% service-connected disabled veteran. As such, I collect Social Security disability. I own my home, but I spent a decade homeless after my discharge for disability from the Navy. I'm 55 now. I cannot go homeless again. It would be a death sentence. For folks who are on disability with these significant major injuries, what happens if we don't sustain the health of this program?
Well, I don't want to be dramatic, but I've worked with this population my whole career. I think we give them a death sentence. You cannot have people out there who've served this country, or you cannot have workers who've helped to build this country strong, and then all of a sudden, because of inaction, we slash their benefits by 20%. You think about it, if you're getting $1,200 a month, you are barely surviving. And if you then get a cut there, you're not going to be able to survive. Right now, these people are making tough choices between the things that we take for granted, eating, paying their rent, paying for their medicine. I don't think that this country can allow that to happen. These are workers' benefits. People have paid into the system, and they deserve the comfort and certainty that this benefit will continue and it will not be threatened.
And you have noted in your testimony that just a fraction of those who apply are actually granted disability because it's a very rigorous standard.
That's correct. I mean, at the DDS level right now, there's about a 32% approval rate. I don't usually focus on approval or disapproval. What I focus on is making certain that we make the right decision. But these are people who are who deserve our support and our help, but they've also earned it. It's an earned benefit.
You noted that there are these cooperative disability investigative units around the country in 35 states, and I think I understood you to say that for each dollar invested, we get $15
I
back.
think the Office of Inspector General says 17.
$17 back. Is there any reason that we don't just go ahead and put one into another 15 states?
Money. When I came back, we only had 24. I've already diverted money from customer service, where I should be serving the public, to put these units in, trying to balance. So I'm putting in 10 more, which gives us a 35, but I don't have the resources to do more than that.
So if we're getting $17 back for every dollar we put in, maybe there'd be a bipartisan support for that kind of smart investment. Now, there's been a lot of concern expressed. I mean, you've noted it's very difficult to be approved for disability, and that the fraud rate is minuscule. But certainly having investigation units are part of what keeps the solvency. So maybe that's a bipartisan conversation we can have for that type of return on the invested. And then you've also noted these continuing disability reviews, which are basically another fraud control. You go back and recheck whether somebody is still disabled, because sometimes people heal from a disability. But there's a backlog of 1.3 million CDRs, and you're proposing we try to take on some of that backlog, but maybe colleagues on both sides of the aisle could agree that we should accelerate the investment for those reviews. Do we have a sense of whether those reviews primarily serve a preventive service, that is, people knowing that they'll go through these reviews, it reduces even that small fraction of fraud, or do we find people who have improved and they should be coming off the disability rolls, and therefore there's a return on these reviews?
The CDRs are designed to do just that. When people come on the rolls, we know that some are likely to improve and some will not. For those that are likely to improve, we should go back within the time frame to review to see if there is improvement, and when we don't, of course, they continue to get a check even though they may no longer be disabled. So that would be important. Also, when we do the reviews, we may see some patterns that suggest that things are inappropriate, that may allow us to see if there is fraudulent activity. I think that if you support the President's 2016 budget, where he's asking for a dedicated program integrity budget, we would be able to do many of the things you're talking about. That 16 budget will allow us to do 908,000 CDRs versus the 700 that we're doing this year, or the 500 we did last year. So I would urge... So
I'll do a summary statement because I'm out of time. But I think you're saying if we invest in these two programs, the investigative units and in the CDRs, we will even further improve the efficiency and appropriateness of this program. That's a win-win.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Sanders. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to discuss an important social safety net that's available to all working Americans, Social Security Disability Insurance. This program allows workers that have paid in with at least 5 years of work to be insured in the event that they become disabled by disabling injury or illness or other condition. Now, if the members of the committee will indulge, I would like to take a brief moment to brag about the program's proud origins in the state of Wisconsin. In the state of Wisconsin, we have something called the Wisconsin Idea, which has actually come under attack in recent days by our governor. But first articulated in 1904, the Wisconsin Idea states that the mission of the University of Wisconsin system is to solve problems and to improve people's lives beyond the classroom. Essentially, that academicians and government experts should work together to solve social problems. It was in the spirit of the Wisconsin Idea that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt asked 2 Wisconsin professors, Arthur Altmeyer and Edwin Whitty, to design the Social Security program and system. Now, from the beginning, Altmeyer advocated for a disability insurance program, stating that it might eventually be of even greater need than old age protection. But he was wary at the time of potential political attacks against such a program. So it took a little over 2 decades for Altmeyer's disability insurance program vision and dreams to actually be realized. The program we have today is really due to that vision. However, I'm very concerned by the politics that brings us to this hearing in this moment today. Concerned that the Social Security Disability Insurance Program has really come under attack by Republicans in the House who are putting up procedural obstacles to the way that we've sustained the viability of this program over many, many years, and setting a stage actually for a battle over its future. Ms. Colvin, the AARP and every major retirement advocacy group opposes this particular House Republican recent action tactic regarding Social Security Disability Insurance Trust Fund because it puts the whole program at risk. Can you tell me if it's true that the only 2 means available, other than, of course, transferring money between the Social Security or into the Social Security Disability Trust Fund, the only means available to restore solvency would be either drastic benefit cuts or raising revenues with policies like increasing the earnings cap?
Well, clearly, any change that you make is going to take some time. That's why the President put forth the reallocation proposal. We did not expect the type of reaction because this has been done 11 times in the past on a bipartisan basis. And so, in fact, 5 of those times we transferred resources from DI to OASI. Clearly, any reform is going to require a combination of the things you've talked about. Some changes perhaps to benefits and some changes to revenue. And there are many proposals out there that have been presented by many bipartisan groups. It's a matter of whether or not the country remains committed to providing this basic benefit for workers of this country.
But obviously, if we were able to do the transfers that you describe having been done 11 times before in both directions, we don't face the immediate issue of drastic cuts.
And then we can have a thoughtful discussion about what changes would occur and try to minimize the impact on those who receive those benefits. When the President put forth those 6 principles, it was designed to make certain that people would not be harmed as we looked at reforming the process.
You know, I appreciate my colleagues who have taken the time to share the stories of their constituents who have applied for and are eligible for and receive Social Security disability insurance benefits. because oftentimes we talk about them as a group rather than share their individual stories. But I think that if we find ourselves in the policy choice between either cutting benefits to the very most vulnerable in our society, by some reports 20%, by your own testimony 20%, or asking the wealthiest 6% in this country to pay the same in Social Security taxes as poor and middle class workers pay, I know which side I'm on.
Thank you.
Senator Ayotte.
I want to thank the chairman, I want to thank you, the witness, for being here today, and wanted to understand this. As I hear about 11 years of transfers, back, whether it's from the old age fund to the Social Security, the disability fund, and obviously the immediate issue facing us in 2016, we've sort of been here before since 1994, where we've transferred money from old age to disability with the goal of buying time to fix the program. So we've been doing this for about 20 years with the same problem. So we know what the problem is. And so how do we avoid getting back in the same position next year and the year after that, where we're kicking the can? So how do we avoid that? Because it seems to me we owe the people who really need this fund, and it's important to them, that we actually try to solve the long-term viability of it. And also we've got the long-term viability of the old age fund as well. So it's wonderful to get 6 principles from the president, but I'd also love to know what he'd support in terms of concrete reform so we can work together.
Well, certainly I think it's going to be incumbent that Congress sit down and look at the various proposals that are out there and determine which ones you can support. This proposal that is before us now is to give you the time to be able to do that.
See, but here's what I'm struggling with. We've had so much time on this. What is it, what we would love to see from the administration is concrete proposals that, I know that Senator Baldwin referred to a proposal in the House, but what is it the administration could support that, rather than just a transfer, would actually reform and preserve the programs so that we can work together to figure out on a bipartisan basis how we're preserving this for the long term, and we're not having Groundhog Day against, I feel like it's sort of probably Groundhog Day. If we went back to 1994, I bet you there were senators asking the same question as me here. Can you help me with that? Or does the administration have a plan to submit to us that we could look at some concrete proposals that they might support?
I can only speak today to the proposal that's before you, which is the President's 2016 budget, which sets forth the reallocation plan as well as numerous legislative proposals and some demonstration proposals, et cetera. And I think you have those. I can certainly walk through those if you wish.
I do, but I guess what I would ask is, I understand reallocation, but I think that's just basically robbing Peter to pay Paul. Let's not kid ourselves. And I hope that the administration will actually submit some concrete. If they don't like the House proposal, then let's hear what the concrete proposals are that they would submit. And I hope other people are listening to this and would submit to us some ideas we can work on together. I wanted to follow up to understand, I don't know if I got to the hearing a little bit late, and wanted to understand if you've testified about, we have seen, going back to 1994 and even looking forward, a significant increase in the number of claims that the disability fund has to cover. And could you help me understand what you believe is driving that? And what do we have to look at in terms of, as we see a situation where we see an increasing number of claims, that obviously exacerbates the fiscal challenge that we face. And all of us want to make sure that the people who really need this fund are able to access it. And so can you give me a sense of what we're facing?
Absolutely. The increase in the disability rolls during this period of time should not have been a surprise. It's been projected by the actuaries and the trustees of Social Security since 1995, and they were right on target. The primary reasons were the economic and demographic factors, the fact that the baby boomers were reaching the disability-prone years and would be, in fact, coming on to the disability rolls, the fact that more women were working and getting benefits on their own right. In fact, they're now in parity with men. We knew that this was going to occur. I think the one area that may not have been fully projected was the recession, and so certainly people who were marginally employed, a number of those individuals came on our rolls. If you look at the data now, you see that those variables are becoming minimal, and so now the number of applications are less. The number has significantly decreased, and the actuaries, I believe, project that that decrease will continue to go down and level out, because now you have individuals who were disability-prone years now going to retirement years. Most of your baby boomers will be going out into the retirement pool. And of course, the actuarial challenges are related to the fact that we have less workers paying into the system than when we first started this program. So I don't think you should be surprised by the spike. And now, of course, we're pleased to see that that spike is decreasing as was projected.
So one thing, I know my time is up, but one thing I don't understand, and perhaps you could help me with this. I understand the baby boomer issue because it's frankly an issue we're facing in the old age fund, right, and Medicare and many other programs. And I understand the funding problem in terms of the recession, meaning number of people paying in. Maybe I misunderstood your testimony. Is there a relationship between when it's a recession, more people go to disability, or is it were you just speaking to the funding issue? Because if that's a connection, I'm curious why that connection would be there.
No, I think you have people who are marginally employed. They work part-time. They may have situations where they're in and out of the job market, and they really try to hold on. During a recession, you will see more of those people applying for disability, and they, in fact, meet our requirements. People want to work, and they try to work as long as they possibly can. But in some situations, they're just not able to. That's why you have provisions in the statute relative to substantial gainful activity. People who are on disability rolls are allowed to earn a certain amount. We want to encourage that. And so there is a correlation. We'd be very happy to meet with you privately and share more information with you.
I would love, for the record, more follow-up information.
We would certainly love to do that.
Thank you, Senator Ayotte. That concludes the questions for the first panel this morning. Commissioner Colvin, thank you for agreeing to testify this morning. This is an important topic, and we're going to need to work together on a long-term solution to better serve our disabled. That prediction that is so accurate from 20 years ago must have understood every demographic change that was going to happen, and yet we didn't take those factors into consideration to come up with a solution. So I'm hoping that we don't just kick the can down the road. I'm hoping that the President will take an active role in this. And one of the main reasons is in 2033, we're not going to be able to do any transfers from old age or the disability fund or the Medicare HI fund, that Part A. They're all going to be in the same shape come 2033. So reallocation won't be possible. So I hope we don't kick the can down the road. Thank you very much for testifying.
Chairman, if I could just very briefly. I think at the end of the day, there is pretty clear agreement. I would hope that nobody here is going to be supportive of a 19% cut for some of the most vulnerable people in this country. But also, I think there's widespread recognition that we have a serious problem that has to be addressed. So my solution or suggestion is, let's deal with this. Let's do what the President said. Let's do what has been done 11 times. Let's sit down and figure out how we do not kick the can down the road.
Thank you. The next panel, while we're setting up for the panel, I'll introduce the three witnesses who we're honored to have before the committee this morning. We've talked about the problem now. I'm hoping we get the solutions. First, we'll hear from Dr. Duggan. Dr. Duggan is the Wayne and Jodi Cooperman Professor of Economics at Stanford University and a leading expert on federal disability programs. Prior to joining Stanford, Duggan held faculty positions at the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Maryland, and Harvard University He was also an economist with President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors in 2009 and 2010. Dr. Duggan has written extensively on the causes of the rise in disability insurance over the last 30 years, along with his co-author, David Autor of Harvard University, proposed reforming the disability system using front-end interventions focused on rehabilitation upon the onset of a disability to keep workers in the labor market. Second, we'll hear from Dr. Jong, who is a professor of economics at the University of Amsterdam and managing partner at APE, a research firm in the Netherlands. He's an expert on European disability programs and considered by many to be the father of disability reform in Holland. He has published widely on Social Security and disability insurance. He has also advised the European Union, the OECD, and the World Bank, and many countries confronting disability issues. Finally, we'll hear from Ms. Lang. Ms. Lang is staff attorney at the National Senior Citizens Law Center, where she works on issues related to Social Security, disability insurance, and supplemental security income. Prior to joining the National Senior Citizens Law Center, Ms. Lang was an attorney at the Legal Aid Bureau in Maryland and has worked for a variety of other legal services for low-income people. Ms. Lang has an undergraduate degree from Oberlin College, a law degree from Fordham University, and a master's degree in teaching English to speakers of other languages from the University of Pennsylvania. For the information of colleagues, each witness will take 5 minutes for their opening statements, followed by questions. Dr. Duggan, please begin.
It is truly an honor to be with you here today. The Social Security Disability Insurance Program currently provides insurance against the risk of disability to more than 151 million American adults. The program represents an extremely important part of our nation's safety net as it protects workers and their families from the risk of a disability that prevents or greatly inhibits a person's ability to work. Nearly 9 million adults received SSDI, disabled worker benefits, in December 2014. SSDI expenditures currently exceed program revenues by 26%, and as a result, the program's trust fund is rapidly being depleted. Current projections from the OASDI trustees suggest that the trust fund will reach zero in late 2016. As shown in Figure 1 of my written testimony, enrollment in the SSDI program has grown steadily since the late 1980s, from 2.3% of adults aged 25 to 64 in 1989 to 5.0% in 2013. In my testimony today, I will briefly summarize the factors that are responsible for this growth. And in my written testimony, I also outline the implications of this growth for the U.S. labor market and discuss some prospects for reform of the SSDI program. One contributor, as has been discussed already today, to the growth in SSDI enrollment has been the aging of the baby boom generations. Individuals in their 50s and early 60s are significantly more likely to receive SSDI benefits than their counterparts in their 30s and 40s. However, there has also been a significant increase within age groups during this time period. Consider individuals in their 50s. In 1989, 4.3% of adults in this age group were receiving SSDI benefits. By 2013, this had almost doubled to 8.3%. The increase was also substantial for people in their early 60s or for adults from 25 to 49. Because of these age-specific increases, the aging of the population explains only about 1/5 of the increase in SSDI enrollment from 2.3% to 5.0%. Put another way, if age-specific rates of SSDI enrollment had not changed over this time period, SSDI enrollment would have grown from 2.3 to 2.8%, not to 5.0%. Another factor, as has been mentioned, is the increase in the fraction of women who are insured from the program. From 1989 to 2013, the fraction of women 25 to 64 insured for the program increased from 66 to 75%. Taking account of this factor can explain another 12% of the growth in SSDI enrollment. So about 1/3 of the growth in SSDI enrollment from 1989 to 2013 as a fraction of the population is attributable to these two factors. Another important determinant of the growth in SSDI enrollment since the 1980s based on my own previous research with David Otter and others, is the liberalization of the program's medical eligibility criteria that occurred in the mid-1980s. As shown in Figure 2, there has been a substantial increase in award rates for diseases of the musculoskeletal system and mental disorders, while award rates for neoplasms and circulatory conditions have remained roughly constant. The shift is important because, as shown in recent research, employment potential of individuals with these sometimes more subjective conditions is substantial, and it is often somewhat difficult to verify the severity. A fourth contributor to the rise in SSDI enrollment has been the reduction in the generosity of OASI retired worker benefits. As a result of legislation passed in 1983, the fraction of full benefits that a worker can receive at age 62 if they claim retirement benefits is falling from 80 to 70%, and as a result, the ratio of SSDI benefits to those early benefits is growing from 25% higher to 43% higher. Some of my own previous research shows that this has resulted in an increase in SSDI enrollment. Another important driver of the rise in SSDI enrollment is the sensitivity of the program to economic conditions. As shown in Figure 3 of my testimony, applications to the program are highly responsive to the unemployment rate, with applications rising substantially during economic downturns and falling when the economy improves. Previous research has shown that individuals who lose their job or are unable to find a new job are more likely to exit the labor force and apply for SSDI benefits. This is troubling when one considers the low exit rate from the program back into the labor force. There have been other factors that have contributed as well to the rise in SSDI enrollment, including changes in replacement rate and other factors that I outline in my written testimony. The steady rise in SSDI enrollment, though, has started to slow down over the last couple of years, and I talk more about that in my written testimony. While providing valuable insurance to tens of millions of Americans, the SSDI program reduces the incentive to work for both individuals on the program and those applying for SSDI benefits. The growth in the program has coincided with a substantial reduction in employment rates among individuals with disabilities. For example, from 1988 to 2008, the employment rate of men in their 40s and 50s who report a work-limiting disability fell by 12 percentage points. One way to improve incentives in the SSDI program is to intervene sooner for individuals with work-limiting conditions so that they can continue working. And we've talked a bit, this has already been discussed somewhat here today. The payoff to keeping a potential SSDI applicant in the workforce is very high, given that the average present value of an SSDI award is in the neighborhood of $300,000. Increasing employment among individuals with disabilities could improve their economic well-being and increase their autonomy, while also reducing the fiscal strains on the Social Security program. Sorry, I ran over.
Dr. de Jong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor for me as a Dutchman to address your committee, but it's also it also restricts myself. I come from a country where the minimum wage, the legal minimum wage, is at the level of $1,200 per month, the same as the average benefit, even under the current euro-dollar transfer rates. Moreover, I come from a country which is not bipartisan, where governments are tripartisan coalitions or even quadripartisan. So what I learned here this morning is a lot about US politics, and I'm sorry to say much less about the solutions of the dooming problems with funding disability benefits. A lot of the discussions were about funding and much less, with a few exceptions, about the system. What I'm present is a system change, and I'm sorry to have to use the word which you made use of, privatization, and strong especially strong incentives for employers, engaging employers. But the principle was focus on capacity, not on incapacity. And that is something which may be changed if you look at the SSDI system. But I feel somewhat awkward to suggest
as a foreigner thinks to your political program. Anyway, let me start with my testimony. Disability benefit schemes are often used as a provision to accommodate social change and cyclical ups and downs, as Mark just has evidenced. In the Netherlands, the DI scheme supported structural change towards a service-oriented economy, and it modified the transition of Dutch households from a traditional single breadwinner type to a modern dual-earner family. Similar uses of disability benefit schemes could be seen in Eastern Europe to soften the pains of transition to a market economy in the 90s. In the US, too, the pronounced positive relationship between the national unemployment rate and the SSDI application rate shows that SSDI works as an alternative, a more generous unemployment scheme. It is one of the factors that cause secular growth in the US number of disability benefits, as Mark Duggan just explained. The drawback of using disability benefits as a soft unemployment scheme is that it hides the lack of targeted, more cost-effective provisions and postpones their introduction. Meanwhile, huge unfunded financial liabilities are created, given the long average duration of disability benefit dependency. The Dutch case is a good illustration both of the size of such liabilities and of the long political road it took to change an entitlement-oriented disability policy into an employment-oriented one. To give you an example, in 1990, there was no country in the world that had more disability beneficiaries per 100 workers than the Netherlands. 12% of the labor force was on disability, and the entry rate into disability was 2%. 2 per 100 went each year on disability. Under pressure, which was discussed here, of an aging workforce, the Dutch government took a series of steps, in fact from 1994 onwards. Their success fluctuated, but as of 2002, the steps taken were successful in bringing down DI awards, so the entries, by 66%. I have a figure in my written testimony to show that. The major element causing the drop in DI inflow is early intervention, fueled by strong financial incentives for firms. I am, in my introduction by the chairman, he mentioned that I'm partner in a consultancy, so I'm an employer myself, so I'm experienced in what it means to pay, to finance sickness benefits oneself, because that is an important part of what the Dutch did. All Dutch firms are obliged to pay for sickness benefits themselves, for rehabilitation, for accommodation, and for job mediation during the first 2 years of disablement. And those 2 years are also the mandatory waiting time before you can be awarded a truly long-term disability benefit, which is a public program. So that means that the coverage, the income protection of the first 2 years of disablement is fully privatized. Of course, it's based on legal mandates, but firms have to provide for it themselves. And of course, they can insure against it, and small firms have to insure against such a liability. But they are completely free to do that. This means, moreover, disability benefits, so after 2 years when you're assessed, when you put in a claim and you're awarded a disability benefit, these are financed by contributions that are experience rated at the level of the individual firm. That means that Dutch firms pay substantially higher rates if one or more of their employees enter the disability benefit, the Dutch disability benefit scheme. Dutch workers also face stronger incentives. Although sickness benefits replace about 85% of wages, with a cap, but with a very high cap of about 50,000 euros per year, the DI benefits are lower and such that they make work pay if someone has a residual earning capacity that is more than 20% of his previous earnings. I have to explain to that disability under the Dutch law, under Dutch disability insurance law, is defined in terms of earning capacity, so in terms of money. So you compare what you still can earn with your limitations with what you used to earn before you became disabled. And that earning capacity loss, that is what is insured, what is covered. DI benefits are lower, if such partially disability benefits. So there is within the disability benefit system in Holland a possibility to get partial benefits, which work in fact as a wage subsidy. But if partially disabled workers do not use their residual capacity, they get a much lower benefit. So there is a strong incentive to use as much as you can of your residual capacity. From 2004, more stringent eligibility standards apply, and these standards are strictly administered, which is also important, by the DI program administrators. Because you can put stringent things in law, but they have to be administrated as well, and that also calls for attention, for incentives for administrators. The denial rate is about 45%, and went up and down with the cyclical conditions. So it turned out to be robust against the business cycle. Of course, applications also in Holland go up when under adverse economic conditions. But at the same time, denial rates went also up. So keep entries at a stable level. Reforming a benefit program creates the issue of what to do with the current beneficiary population. And I think this is unheard of in the US. Between October 2004 and December 2007, all 300,000 DI beneficiaries younger than 45 were reassessed under stricter standards. So during the game, you change the rules, which is, I think, would be here very controversial. Anyway, that was accepted. 39% of the benefits were terminated or reduced, and among this group, about 60% were working 3 years after their benefit status was reviewed, and they lost the benefit or part of their benefits. But this is the only thing you can do to do something about this unfunded liability. Otherwise, you have an inheritance of a lot of people on disability who may be able to work. Well, your continuing disability reviews may take care of that. That I don't know.
Can I ask you to kind of wrap that up?
Yeah.
We'll have a lot more questions.
The Reformed Dutch Disability Scheme purports to cover only those that have hardly any productive capacity left, and to provide other workers with disabilities with strong incentives to remain active. The results for the first 9 years of the operation of the new scheme show that inflow rates have dropped substantially to levels that are reasonable by international standards and show to be robust against the deep recession of 2008-2013. The incentive structure that steers the behavior of employers and long-term sick workers proves to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lang.
Thank you, Chairman Enzi, Ranking Member Sanders, and Senator Perdue. My name is Kate Lang, and I'm an attorney with the National Senior Citizens Law Center. Our principal mission is to protect the rights of low-income older adults. I'm also a co-chair of the Income Security Committee of the Leadership Council of Aging Organizations. or LCAO, a coalition of 72 national aging advocacy organizations that represent millions of older Americans. Members of the coalition include the AARP, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, the National Council on Aging, among many others. And together we work to preserve and strengthen the well-being of America's older population. The LCAO believes that Congress should preserve the disability benefits of millions of older Americans by reallocating the payroll taxes between Social Security's retirement fund and disability fund to equalize the solvency of the two funds, and should do so without any cuts to Social Security coverage, eligibility, or benefits. As we all age, we face an increasing risk of acquiring disabilities that may limit our ability to support ourselves through work and put us at great financial risk. Fortunately, nearly all Americans pay into our Social Security system, a system of earned benefits that protects workers and their families in the event of death, disability, and retirement. More than 9 out of 10 American workers are insured for benefits that can be a lifeline for their families in the event of a qualifying disability. And I'd like to take a moment today to tell you about one of those Americans who is here with us today in her green jacket. Darlene B. is a 60-year-old woman who lives here in Washington, D.C. She worked for many years in a variety of jobs in Pennsylvania and here in the D.C. area. But several years ago, Ms. B's children, who are now 28 and 30, noticed that she was struggling with her memory. She thought it might be related to a brain tumor that had been uncovered in her teens, but she was in fact diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's in her 50s, and she was approved for disability benefits through Social Security's Compassionate Allowances programs. Ms. B's life has changed a lot as a result of her health problems, especially now that her cancer has spread to her spine. She has to plan her activities for each day carefully, and she relies on her son to keep track of her appointments. He is also her representative payee and helps her manage the approximately $900 a month she receives. Nearly all of her benefits go to pay rent and utilities, and she's had to cut back on her expenses now that her income is so limited. If her benefits were cut, she might not be able to afford to continue living in her apartment. And Ms. B will face a benefit cut of about 20%, or $180 a month, if Congress does not act in the next 2 years. The LCAO urges Congress to reallocate Social Security's payroll taxes to ensure continuation of benefits for Ms. B and millions of older Americans with disabilities, and to do so without making any cuts to Social Security coverage, eligibility, or benefits. So I'd quickly like to wrap up with 3 points. First, that most who receive disability insurance benefits are older adults, age 50 and older, so helping DI helps seniors. 7 in 10 beneficiaries are age 50 and older, and 3 in 10 are 60 and older. When disabled workers receive disability insurance benefits as they age into their retirement years, these benefits help to ensure that they won't fall into poverty in later years. The increase in the full retirement age to 67 delays when disabled workers switch to receiving benefits from the retirement fund. And in December 2013, more than 450,000 people aged 65 and 66 received disability insurance benefits. That's over 5% of the disabled workers receiving disability benefits. Under the rules in place until 2003, they would have been receiving retirement benefits instead. And this is just one example of how closely the retirement and disability components of Social Security are interwoven, and how changes to one part impact the other. Second, the need for reallocation has been expected for many years. When Congress last acted to reallocate payroll taxes in 1994, it was predicted that this action would need to be taken again in 2016. And this is due primarily to the rapid but temporary increase in the number of disabled beneficiaries as baby boomers pass through their 50s and early 60s when the risk of disability is greatest. Third, this present situation is nothing new. Congress has rebalanced payroll tax revenues between the two trust funds 11 times over the past 50 years, about equally in both directions. This is a traditional and usually non-controversial step, and there should be nothing unusual or contentious in taking such a step now. In closing, reallocation does not require any increase in tax rates and will maintain the solvency of the combined trust funds until 2033. One of the strengths of our Social Security system is its universality. Most Americans who rely on Social Security disability insurance are, in fact, older adults, and we reject any attempts to manufacture a crisis that pits older adults against people with disabilities. Thank you. I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lang. I want to thank all the panelists for their information and ideas, and hope you'll be open to written questions submitted by people as well. We get into more detail, and you are the three that we're relying on for the solutions. We've, in the earlier panel, covered the problem pretty well. Let me begin my questions with Dr. de Jong. I want to thank you for coming all the way over here, and one of the reasons that we wanted you to testify is when I was in the state legislature, I always tried to find some kind of a state that had already done what we were talking about doing and seeing what the pitfalls were and how they accomplished it. And so you're that on an international scale, and I appreciated it. You talked about privatization of disability insurance as a major instrument in helping the disabled people remain in the workforce, and you probably already sensed that that's a nasty word around here. But what it sounds like you did was get private insurance to pick up the first 2 years. Can you explain how you developed the market for that disability insurance for that first 2 years?
Well, it wasn't really developed. What you have now is that a Dutch employer has to contract whether he wants to insure his financial liabilities towards paying sickness benefits for 2 years is something he can decide himself. There's no mandate. But he's legally mandated to contract occupational health services because, I mean, normally employers, I can speak for myself, are not managers of absenteeism, of sickness absenteeism. So they have to contract company doctors, they have to contract people who so that is all legally mandated, and what you normally see is that, especially for small firms, and most firms are small, is a package that an insurer offers a package including all these occupational health services, so that the management of sickness absenteeism is in the hand of professionals that are contracted by the firm. But the point is that in the end, the employer and the sick employee together have their responsibilities, and what their responsibilities are is when sickness lasts longer than 6 weeks is laid down in law also by what is called a gatekeeper protocol, by a protocol, where the steps that you have to take and that you have to follow, promoting work resumption as soon as possible, are laid down in law. And that sounds like a lot of red tape. I mean, of course, you can follow those rules, but in the end, you're judged if it all fails, and within those 2 years, a employee is not able to return to work or to return to the labor market, then he or she can claim a disability benefit. But then the public disability benefit administrators will test whether enough effort has been put in that work resumption plan, the reintegration plan, as it is called. So that is how it works. So it's not really a market. I mean, of course, there are private insurance. Some of them you may know, even ING, for instance, in Holland, and they provide those policies.
Thank you. Dr. Duggan, Your research has shown that Social Security Administration's projections of the growth has consistently been too optimistic. Do you believe the SSA's predictions of the future program growth are too low? And can you explain why?
So I served on a technical panel to evaluate the assumptions and methods used by the Office of the Actuary, and I want to praise. I think they have it's an incredibly complicated program to examine. There's the old age program, the disabled program, and so forth. And I have not studied the most recent trustees report, but from my service on the panel, then my recollection is that in certain respects, my projections were my analysis suggested that projections were somewhat optimistic, looking ahead to the future, about optimistic in terms of the program flattening out somewhat more in the future. And it is true that, there are trustees' reports each year, and they are there's an incredible amount of work that go into them, and I've gotten to know a lot of the people who work on the staff, and they're outstanding. I do think there are years in which they were on target with their projections, but more often than not, the projections were below in terms of the size of the SSDI program, let's say, as of today. But that's not to say it's a complicated thing to measure. As you can see from my testimony, the growth in SSDI enrollment has been larger than one would expect based purely on the aging of the baby boom population and the increase in the fraction of women insured for the program. So there have been really big changes in the composition of conditions with which people are qualifying for the program. So, for example, conditions like stroke and cancer have been relatively flat since, let's say, 1989. Whereas conditions like musculoskeletal conditions and mental disorders have grown a lot. That is not to say that people with all disability recipients with musculoskeletal or mental disorders, that those are not very deserving recipients, but there has been a big change in the composition of the recipient population that is much greater than one would have expected based purely on, let's say, the aging and the insured status. So I don't envy their task because there are a lot of variables that go into it. There's the economy, there is and many of the age distribution and so forth. But I do I can't say, because I haven't studied the most recent report, how that one looks. I do. My preliminary look at it suggests that there have been some adjustments since the panel recommendations that I was a part of that have gone on certain dimensions in the dimension that we as a panel recommended, but I just can't, I don't remember them right now, sorry.
Okay. Thank you. I'll ask some of those in writing, and
yeah.
appreciate all of your expertise, and we'll draw on that significantly for all three of you. Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for coming here, especially you, Mr. DeYoung, who come across the ocean to testify, and we appreciate that. Let me start off with Ms. Lang. Ms. Lang, you are here testifying on behalf of the Leadership Council of Aging Organizations.
Yes, I am.
Which represents more than 70, as I understand it, senior citizen groups.
That's right.
And all of those groups, including the AARP and the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, I think all told they represent some 60 million Americans. Is that about right?
About right, yes.
And you're here very clearly to tell us that you believe we should go forward with the allocation process that has taken place 11 times previously. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Why? Why do 60 million groups representing 60 million Americans think that we should make sure there are not major cuts in disability programs?
Well, as I mentioned in my testimony, 70% of the current disability beneficiaries are, in fact, older adults. So any reduction in the program would harm them. I think I'm sorry to see that Senator Sessions and Senator Ayotte have left because they made the comment about robbing Peter to pay Paul. And the money is not actually taken out of the old age or retirement fund. It's reallocating the payroll taxes that go into each fund. So I don't think it's accurate to characterize the situation as stealing from retirees to pay benefits to people with disabilities. It's merely reallocating the percentage of the payroll taxes that go to each fund. And it is very important to make sure that those older Americans who meet the very strict disability standard for receiving these benefits are able to continue receiving the income that they need as they age into their retirement years.
Ms. Lang, I happen to believe that at the end of the day, despite what the Republicans did in the House, we're going to reach an agreement, and I don't think anybody here really wants to see a 19% cut in disability benefits. That's what I think. But you also worked as an attorney representing low-income people with disabilities. Just give us, very briefly, what would a 19% cut in benefits mean to people who are barely making it today?
I would say for my clients, I represented dozens of people applying for disability benefits over several years, and for those who did meet the very strict standard and were able to get on benefits, it was a fairly low amount of money, so any sort of cut for them would really, I think, mean homelessness for many of them.
How does a person with a disability survive out on the street when the weather gets, in my state, 10 below zero?
I don't know. And quite frankly, many shelters for homeless people are not equipped to accommodate people with disabilities and serve them. So it really can be a death sentence for many individuals with disabilities to face homelessness.
You know, Mr. Chairman, I love the idea that we brought somebody from Europe to be with us today. I think that's a great idea, and I think we should do more of it. It's called best practices. We learn, you know, Vermont can learn from Wyoming, and Wyoming can learn from California, and we can learn from Europe, and so forth and so on. But what is interesting to me is that when we talk about the United States and Europe, I think what we should begin with is appreciating that the social safety net that we have here is quite minimal compared to Europe. I would just ask, for a moment, if I could ask Dr. DeYoung, in this country, we have 40 million people who have no health insurance. We have many more who are underinsured, large co-payments. How many people in Holland don't have any health insurance?
Well, only those that refuse to, well, no, everybody has health.
Everybody has health insurance. So maybe we should have a hearing here as to how that works. And my guess is you end up spending far less per capita on health care than we do in the United States. In this country, we have large numbers of people who can't afford to go to university or college. Others graduate deeply in debt. What's the cost of a college education in Holland?
Well, you mean the tuition fees?
Yeah.
That would be around 2,000 euros per year.
But my understanding is also for many it's free. Is that correct? For lower income people, it might be free?
They can, yeah, they get grants.
Yeah.
They get grants.
Okay. So now let me ask you this about the reason that you're here, which is disability benefits. Let's hypothesize that you have two people who suffered the same exact accident, right, on the job. One's in the United States and one's in Holland. And they, needed disability benefits. Correct me if I am wrong, but my understanding is that for someone who is fully disabled in Holland, they would receive benefits equivalent to about 85% of what their previous income was. Is that correct?
During the first 2 years on average, and that is including collectively bargained supplements.
Right.
So that is, yeah.
They have a strong union.
So there is a 70% legal base, you could say, and all workers have supplements that are from collectively bargained arrangements. But that's only for the first 2 years.
Okay, right. My understanding, and Ms. Lang, you correct me if I'm wrong, or anybody up there correct me if I'm wrong, that while for the first 2 years, 85% of a worker's benefits goes to disability. In this country, Ms. Lang, do you know what the number is?
It's less than 50% replacement rate, probably 40, 45.
So I think, Mr. Chairman, at another point, we may want to continue this discussion and see if we in the United States can move toward where Holland is and their very generous benefits for some of the most vulnerable people in their country. I think it would be an interesting discussion. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Perdue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along with yourself and the ranking member and Senator Whitehouse, I've sat here this morning and listened to every question and every ounce of testimony because I think this is at the core of our financial crisis right now. Not the disability and what we're about to do to solve that problem for 18 years. To me, that's the wrong thing we should be debating. I think we've agreed on two things today, or at least I have. The ranking member early this morning accused a friend of mine in the House of, or misinterpreted, I think, comments made there. But there are two things that I agree with the ranking member on. One is that we've got to move to ensure the benefits are not reduced, period. Two, we've got to solve the long-term crisis. I've been saying this for quite a while. I believe this is not a debate over what we do between now and 17 relative to 2033 with the disability versus the old age fund. But I disagree on that this is a manufactured crisis. I've heard several people this morning mention that, and I take offense for that, about that. I think this is our irresponsibility over the last really 30 years, but certainly since 94, across 3 presidents, 11 different Congresses. We've kicked this ball down the court. I think the only hesitancy I have personally about doing this is that I'd like to see some long-term debate or debate about a long-term solution. That's really what my concern is, Mr. Chairman, is what do we do for the beneficiaries past 2033? Ms. Lang, you talk about stealing from Peter to pay Paul. I disagree with your characterization of that, but the one thing I am sure of is that by doing this, all we're doing is stealing from the future to make sure we don't have a problem for the next 18 years. That I will not be comfortable with. We've got to debate that. If we're going to move toward a responsible budget in this country, we've got to solve the Social Security, long-term Social Security, and then eventually the Medicare program as well, which is even bigger problem. I have a question for Dr. Duggan. You mentioned that about a third, I think you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, about about a fifth, about 20% of the increase. And I think the number of people participating in the DI program have almost tripled since 1984 in the last 30 years. About a fifth of that was age-related, and I think you said about 12% was due to spouses coming into the workforce. Help me understand with some granularity what the other 2/3 represent.
So there has been a large increase in the likelihood that, about a third combined between those two factors, the aging of the baby boom generation and the increase in the fraction of women who are insured for the SSDI program. Add those, and the numbers differ a bit depending on what exactly base year you use, but it's in the neighborhood of 1/3 from, let's say, 1989. And the increase, the rest of the increase is attributable to a greater likelihood that a person with certain characteristics will be on the program. So I gave one example, and the increase has been larger for women than for men because of this growth in the share insured, partly because of that. But take men, for example, 50 to 59. So men in their 50s, 25 years ago, 5.8% of them were receiving SSDI benefits. And now, 8.8% of them are receiving. So basically an increase from almost 6% to almost 9% during that time period. And that is, that sort of increase has existed at other ages as well. And so if we look at, where is that coming from? So if one looks at the composition of conditions with which people are qualifying, and this comes from figure 2 of my testimony, and I try to distill the complexity into just a few figures that there's a lot more, you can drill down at a much finer level, but there has been a change in the composition of conditions with which people are qualifying. Musculoskeletal conditions, for example, the award rate for those has increased by a factor of about 6 since just prior to the liberalization that we've talked about in 1984. Whereas during that same time, the award rate, and when I say the award rate, I mean here number of awards divided by number of people insured for the program. So you can see that in figure 2. And if you look at the corresponding change for people, let's say, cancer or with circulatory conditions like stroke, those have been pretty flat. So there's been a big change in the characteristics of the people flowing onto the program. And so that's where it's come from.
Thank you. I just have one last comment. Dr. Jong, your indictment of our partisanship is well-deserved this morning, and I appreciate your comments and Ms. Lang as well. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me first ask each of the witnesses, starting with Dr. Duggan, would you recommend an across-the-board benefit cut in Social Security disability insurance in the neighborhood of 20% under any circumstances?
I would not recommend that, no.
Because?
Well, I haven't evaluated the effects of that specific proposal, but it would clearly, as has been talked about earlier today, SSDI provides benefits to many of the nation's most vulnerable citizens, and that would inflict significant hardship on a very large number of people. So I certainly would not.
Dr. DeYoung, how about you?
My answer would be, thank you for asking this question. My answer would be more bold. I would be very strongly against it, but maybe what I know of the SSDI system is that it focuses much more on incapacity than on capacity.
But that is, irrespective of that, with respect to my exact question, which was, would you recommend a near 20%?
No, I would.
Cut? You would not.
I would be more selective.
Okay, Ms. Lang.
No, I would not.
Okay, Dr. Duggan, you appear to have looked pretty closely at this question. You appear also to have focused pretty much on the expenditure side. Do you have a view as to how the recent changes in income inequality, the extent to which higher incomes have exploded in this country, has changed the percentage of income that is above the $118,000 payroll cap and has therefore been a factor in the current Social Security imbalance?
So I personally haven't evaluated that specific thing, but I recall from reading reports by the actuaries and by CBO and others that the fraction of income that is within that cap has declined over time. It is also true that the rise in inequality has affected benefits for people at the lower end of the income distribution because the bend points, we have this benefit formula. There's essentially the same benefit formula used for Social Security retired worker benefits. It's a 90-32-15 benefit formula. And the points where that formula bends from 90 to 32 and from 32 to 15, those are indexed to average wage growth in the economy. And so some of the first research that I did on this program showed that because of slower wage growth at the lower end of the distribution, lower income workers were replacing more of their income at the 90% rate than at the 32% rate, basically because the bend point was moving faster than their incomes were. So at some level, the formula has helped cushion somewhat that change.
That might cushion it for individual workers, but as a program, the effect has been to forego what otherwise would have been revenue and has added to the deficit, correct? I.e., if income inequality had not changed from, let's say, 1990 to now, if that were a constant, there would have been more income subject to payroll tax and there would be more revenue coming into Social Security and we would have less of a deficit. That's just kind of mathematics, isn't it?
It just depends a little bit on the assumptions that you, like at what rate will those things grow. But in general, the spirit of what you're describing seems plausible to me. It just depends. I don't mean to, it depends a bit. The devil's in the details a little bit on what you assume would have happened for those.
Let me try it this way. You've got a chunk of American salary that is under $118,000.
Right.
And it contributes revenue to Social Security.
Right.
You got a chunk of American salary that's over $118,000, and it doesn't contribute to Social Security.
Right.
If the second chunk gets bigger relative to the first chunk, instead of staying even, that means less money for Social Security. Isn't that pretty simple?
It depends. Like I said, it just depends on the assumption. Are you going to bring it into balance by raising the under?
No. I'm not
the
asking out your assumptions. I'm just asking if what I've said is accurate.
It is the case that I don't know if it's 90 to 83%. I think someone here earlier said that. Is that the? But that.
It is the case that if less of America's income is subject to taxation than otherwise would be, the revenues for the program are less than they otherwise would be.
Right? It's plausible once again, but there are behavioral responses that one needs to take into account. So if you change but it is. Yeah. It is.
Oh, all right. Well,
I'm not.
Thank you, Dr. Duggan.
Right.
The senator's time has expired, and I want to thank everyone for their participation today. That concludes the questions for the second panel this morning. But I would hope that they would.
May I offer an exhibit for the record
without objection? Sure.
Thank you.
People can submit statements too if they wish. We appreciate the time here for all of our witnesses and hope that they will be open to answering questions. Sometimes the questions can be more specific in writing than they, mostly because ones with numbers kind of put the people in the back to sleep, and that's not very exciting. So I want to remind my colleagues questions for the record are due no later than 6 p.m. today, filed in writing with the committee clerk in Dirksen 624, and we hope the witnesses will respond within 7 days. With no further business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned.